Hey there! Tonight we're stepping into something ancient and strange. You've probably never thought much about how power really works, how it gets inside people's heads and stays there. But stick with me, because what you're about to experience is the story of how ancient Egyptian pharaohs turned the shortest day of the year into proof that they were gods. Before we begin, drop your city and the time you're watching this in the comments below. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from during these quiet hours. And if you genuinely enjoy what we do here, consider liking and subscribing. But no pressure. I'm not going to chase you with a crook and flail over it. Now dim the lights. Maybe light a candle if you have one. Let the world outside fade a little. And let's walk together into ancient Egypt, into the longest night of the year, when the sun itself seemed to be dying and only one person could bring it back. You wake up in darkness that tastes like stone and incense. The air in your bedchamber is cold, unnaturally cold for Egypt, and for a moment you forget where you are. Then you remember. You are Pharaoh. You are Amenhotep III, Lord of the Two Lands, and today is the day the sun might not return. The linen sheets beneath you are damp with sweat despite the chill. Your body knows something your mind hasn't fully accepted yet. Today isn't just another ceremony. Today is the performance that will define whether your people see you as a man wearing a crown or as the living embodiment of Ra himself, the sun god who dies and is reborn each year on the winter solstice. Listen to the silence around you. It's not peaceful. It's expectant, like the moment before thunder, like the breath held before a scream. Somewhere in the darkness beyond your chamber walls, priests are already moving through corridors you designed for this exact purpose. Every stone in your temples was placed with astronomical precision. Every angle calculated. Every reflection planned. But none of that matters if you can't sell it. If you can't stand in front of 30 million people and convince them that when the sun rises today, it's because you commanded it to. The servants who come to dress you move like they're handling something fragile and dangerous. Their hands shake as they layer the ceremonial robes over your skin. You can smell their fear, mixed with myrrh and frankincense, creating a scent that will forever mean this day to you. The fabric whispers against your body, each piece heavier than the last, until you're wearing what feels like architecture. Your crown waits on a stand carved from Lebanese cedar. In the lamplight, the gold looks almost liquid, like captured sunlight that someone managed to hammer into shape. When they place it on your head, the weight makes your neck tense. It's designed to be heavy. Heavy enough that when you stand before your people, they'll see the burden of divinity pressing down on you. They'll see someone strong, enough to bear it. Through the narrow window slits, the pre-dawn darkness is absolute. No stars, no moon. Just the void where the sun used to be, where it will be again if everything goes according to plan, if the calculations are correct, if the mirrors are positioned perfectly, if the light cooperates, if the crowd believes. No pressure. You can taste copper in your mouth. Not blood, just the metallic tang of adrenaline mixed with the incense smoke that's been burning since midnight. Your tongue feels thick, your throat dry. Someone offers you water from a golden cup and the liquid is so cold it makes your teeth ache. The cup itself is surprisingly heavy, weighted with gold and expectation. The high priest of Amun approaches through the darkness. You hear him before you see him. The soft shuffle of bare feet on limestone. The gentle chime of ceremonial bells sewn into his robes. When he speaks, his voice is barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might wake forces better left sleeping. The astronomical calculations are complete, he says. The sun will reach the horizon at precisely the moment we calculated. The mirrors are in position. The inner sanctuary is prepared. Everything is ready. Everything except you, he doesn't say, but you hear it anyway. You nod. You don't trust your voice yet. You're not sure what would come out if you tried to speak. So instead you stand feeling the cold stone floor against your bare feet one last time before they fit you with sandals that were probably worth more than most people's houses. The sandals are new, stiff, uncomfortable. They'll give you blisters by the end of the day, but by then it won't matter. By then you'll either be divine or defeated. The walk from your bedchamber to the temple feels endless. The palace corridors stretch out like the throat of some massive stone creature, swallowing you deeper with each step. Lamplight flickers against walls covered in hieroglyphs that tell the story of previous pharaohs who performed this same ritual. Their carved faces watch you pass with expressions that might be encouragement or warning. It's hard to tell with hieroglyphs. You pass rooms where architects spent years planning today, where astronomers tracked the sun's path across the sky with instruments so precise they could measure angles within fractions of degrees, where metallurgists experimented with mirror surfaces, testing different alloys of copper and bronze until they achieved reflections clear enough to bend sunlight like water. All of that work, all of that genius, all of those sleepless nights spent calculating celestial movements and optical angles, all of it depends on you standing in the right place at the right time and not falling apart in front of everyone you rule. The Temple of Karnak looms ahead like a mountain someone decided to carve doors into. Even in darkness you can feel its mass, its weight, its absolute commitment to the idea that buildings can be arguments. And what this building argues, with every massive column and precisely cut stone, is that the Pharaoh controls forces beyond human understanding. You just have to prove it's true. The temple's entrance swallows you into darkness so complete you can't see your own hands. This is intentional. Every pharaoh before you walked this same path, moving from lamplight into absolute void before emerging into the prepared space where miracles happen. It's theatre. You know it's theatre, but knowing doesn't make your heart beat any slower. Your footsteps echo off walls you can't see. The sound bounces back strange and multiplied, as if dozens of invisible pharaohs are walking alongside you, all of them heading toward the same impossible task. The air smells like burnt offerings and something else, something sharp and mineral that might be fear or might just be the limestone sweating in the cold. Priests flank you on both sides now, though you can barely see them. You can feel their presence, hear their breathing, sense their tension. They've practiced this ceremony hundreds of times. They know their marks. They know their lines. But they also know that if anything goes wrong today, if the sun doesn't cooperate or if the crowd doesn't believe, their carefully constructed world of ritual and power comes crashing down around all of you. The high priest touches your elbow gently, guiding you left, then right, then forward again through passages that wind deeper into the temple's heart. You're walking the path of Ra himself, the journey the sun god makes each night through the underworld before being reborn at dawn. Except Ra is a god and you're just a person in an extremely expensive hat, trying very hard not to trip in the darkness. Then you see it. Light. Not sunlight, not yet, but the warm glow of oil lamps positioned throughout the inner sanctuary. As your eyes adjust, the space reveals itself slowly, like a secret being whispered. The sanctuary is smaller than you expected, but somehow more impressive. Every surface is covered in gold leaf that catches the lamplight and throws it back in soft, shimmering waves. The walls are carved with images of gods and pharaohs, their figures intertwined so completely it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. That's the point. In the centre of the space stands a golden statue of Ra taller than 2 men. Its eyes are inlaid with crystal that catches light and seems to hold it, creating the illusion that the statue is watching, waiting, judging. Before the statue, an altar holds offerings that must have taken months to prepare. Bread shaped like the sun, beer poured into bowls of pure gold, incense burning in braziers carved to look like lotus flowers. But what draws your attention, what makes your breath catch in your throat, are the mirrors. They're positioned throughout the sanctuary in a configuration so precise it looks like frozen geometry. Polished bronze surfaces, each one shaped and angled according to calculations you've seen but don't fully understand. The priests who designed this system spent decades studying how light moves, how it bends, how it can be caught and redirected, like throwing a ball through a series of hoops. When the sun rises, when that first ray of dawn light enters the temple through the carefully aligned doorways and corridors, these mirrors will catch it. They'll bounce it deeper into the building than light should be able to reach. They'll amplify it, focus it, transform it from a natural phenomenon into something that looks an awful lot like divine intervention, if it works. Historical fact time. The Temple of Karnak really was aligned to capture the winter solstice sunrise with remarkable precision. Modern archaeologists have confirmed that the temple's main axis points directly toward the rising sun on the shortest day of the year. The ancient Egyptians didn't have computers or modern surveying equipment, but they had patience, they had mathematics, and they had centuries to get it right. You take your position on a raised platform that faces the temple entrance. From here, you'll be able to see the moment sunlight enters the building. From here, the crowd gathered outside will be able to see you, backlit by the miracle they're about to witness. It's staging, but staging so sophisticated it makes modern theatre look amateur. The priests arrange themselves around the sanctuary, in positions they've practiced until the movements became muscle memory. Some kneel before the statue of Ra. Others stand beside the mirrors, ready to make minute adjustments if needed. One priest, ancient and bone-thin, positions himself beside a water clock, ready to mark the exact moment of sunrise according to calculations made months ago. Everyone waits. The silence is so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. Or maybe that's just the blood rushing in your ears. It's hard to tell. Your hands are shaking slightly, so you clench them into fists and hide them in the folds of your robe. You can't have the living god looking nervous. Through the temple's entrance, you can see the crowd beginning to gather. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. They started arriving yesterday, walking from villages throughout the Nile Valley, bringing offerings and prayers and a desperate hope that today will prove their world still makes sense, that the sun will return, that their pharaoh really does have divine power, that life will continue. You watch them take their places in the pre-dawn darkness, their faces lit by torches that create pools of warm light in the cold. They're too far away for you to see individual expressions, but you can feel their collective mood like a physical presence. Anticipation, fear, faith mixed with doubt. They want to believe, they need to believe, but belief requires evidence, and that's what you're about to give them, or fail to give them. The darkness outside begins to shift from absolute black to something slightly less black. That subtle change that happens before dawn when the world holds its breath. You've seen thousands of sunrises in your life, but this one feels different. This one matters in a way that makes your chest tight and your breath shallow. The old priest beside the water clock makes a soft sound, almost a sigh. It's time. The horizon begins to glow, not with whole light, but with the idea of light. That first suggestion that darkness isn't permanent. The crowd outside goes silent. Not gradually, but all at once, as if someone cut the sound from the world. Thousands of people holding their breath together creates a vacuum that seems to pull at your own lungs. You can feel the moment building. It's physical, like pressure before a storm, like the instant before a wave breaks. Your priests have gone completely still, their earlier nervous energy crystallized into perfect frozen focus. Even the incense smoke seems to hang motionless in the air, waiting. The glow on the horizon intensifies. Red first, deep and dark like wine or blood. Then orange, then gold. The colours bloom across the sky like ink spreading through water, slow and inexorable, and absolutely inevitable. You've watched the sun rise countless times, but watching it now, knowing what's about to happen, transforms the experience from mundane to miraculous. The first ray of direct sunlight appears, thin as a blade, sharp as hope. It cuts through the darkness and enters your temple as if it knows exactly where it's supposed to go. Because it does. Because you and your architects and astronomers spent years teaching it the path. The light travels down the temple's main axis, moving fast as thrown spear, illuminating columns as it passes. Each massive pillar seems to glow for an instant before the light moves on, creating a wave of golden brilliance that races toward the inner sanctuary where you wait. Where you stand absolutely still, arms raised in a position you've practiced until your muscles ache, face arranged in an expression of divine serenity that takes every ounce of control you possess. The light reaches the first mirror. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. The light hits the polished bronze surface and you think, with stomach-dropping certainty, that something's wrong. The calculations were off, the angle isn't right, the mirror isn't positioned correctly. The entire elaborate plan is about to collapse into humiliating failure in front of 30,000 witnesses. Then the light bounces. It hits the first mirror and leaps to the second, then the third, then the fourth, each reflection brighter than the last, as if the light is gathering strength with each bounce. The mirrors catch the sunrise and throw it deeper into the temple, bending it around the corners that should stop it, pushing it into spaces that should be dark. And then, with a suddenness that makes several priests gasp audibly, every mirror in the sanctuary catches fire. Not real fire. Just reflected sunlight concentrated and amplified, until it's almost painful to look at. The bronze surfaces blaze with golden light that fills the entire space, transforming the intimate sanctuary into something that looks like the inside of the sun itself. The statue of Ra, positioned exactly where centuries of planning intended, becomes the focal point. Light converges on the golden figure from a dozen different angles, hitting the crystal eyes and the polished metal surface until the statue seems to be generating its own radiance. It looks alive. It looks awake. It looks like a god opening its eyes after a long sleep and seeing you standing before it. The crowd outside erupts, not cheering exactly, but something deeper and more primal. A sound that's part awe, part relief, part joy so intense it sounds almost like grief. They can see you, backlit by golden vrisha, arms raised toward a statue that appears to be burning with divine light. And what they're seeing looks exactly like what you told them it would be. A pharaoh calling the sun back from death. A king commanding forces that should be beyond mortal control. You hold the pose, arms raised, face serene. Inside you're shaking, but outside you're carved from stone and gold and certainty. You hold it until your shoulders scream, until sweat runs down your back, until you're not sure you can hold it any longer. Then, exactly when the old priest beside the water clock gives the smallest nod, you lower your arms in a gesture that looks casual, but is precisely choreographed. The movement says, "I have spoken to Ra, I have commanded the sun. It has obeyed. We can all relax now." The light continues to pour through the temple, but the moment of peak intensity has passed. The mirrors still reflect, but the effect is fading from miraculous to merely beautiful. That's intentional too. Miracles that last too long stop being miracles and start being examined. Better to give them something intense and brief, something they'll spend years trying to describe to people who weren't there. You descend from the platform on legs that barely support your weight. The high priest approaches with a golden bowl containing something that smells sweet and medicinal. You drink without asking what it is. At this point you drink anything that might stop your hands from shaking. The ceremony has more stages, of course. There are ritual words to speak, offerings to make, prayers to perform. You move through them all with practiced grace, letting muscle memory carry you while your mind tries to process what just happened. It worked. It actually worked. The centuries of architectural planning, the years of astronomical observation, the months of bronze polishing and angle calculating, all of it came together in that single moment of perfect alignment, and your people saw it. They witnessed their pharaoh commanding cosmic forces. They saw proof that you're not just a king appointed by men, but a living god, acknowledged by creation itself. Historical fact time. Ancient Egyptian temples incorporated dozens of astronomical alignments, not just for solstices, but for significant dates throughout the calendar. The precision of these alignments is remarkable by any standard. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, is aligned to true north with an accuracy that modern architects struggle to match, and it was built with tools that wouldn't seem out of place in a middle school shop class. By the time you emerge from the temple into full daylight, the crowd is spread across every available surface. People fill the courtyards, line the walls, cluster on rooftops and in doorways. They've been waiting in the cold for hours, many of them since yesterday, and their faces show a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. They want to see you. They need to see you, so you give them what they need. You walk slowly through a corridor of priests who line your path, each one bowing so deeply their foreheads nearly touch the ground. You can smell the crowd now, thousands of unwashed bodies mixed with perfume and incense and offerings starting to spoil in the morning sun. It should be unpleasant, but instead it feels human, real, grounding after the otherworldly experience of the sanctuary. A child breaks free from the crowd and runs toward you, a girl no more than 6 years old with flowers clutched in her dirty hands. For a moment, your guards tense, ready to intercept, but you raise a hand to stop them. Let her come. She skids to a halt 3 paces away, suddenly shy, suddenly aware that she's standing in front of someone who just commanded the sun. You kneel slowly, bringing yourself down to her level, ignoring the priests who make small concerned noises about divine dignity. The flowers are weeds, really. Things that grow wild along the Nile that she probably picked this morning. They're already wilting, their stems bent and broken from her tight grip. She holds them out with hands that shake worse than yours did. You take the flowers gently. You smile. You say thank you. She runs back to the crowd like she's been released from a spell, and you can hear her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet space. He talked to me, the God King talked to me. And just like that, the crowd loves you. Not because you commanded the sun, though that certainly helped, but because you knelt in your expensive robes and took wilting flowers from a dirty child and treated her gift like it mattered. That's the secret of divine kingship that no architect can calculate and no mirror can reflect. Power needs spectacle, yes, but it also needs these small moments of unexpected humanity. Carefully placed, perfectly timed, just rare enough to feel special. You continue your procession through the crowd, accepting offerings, touching outstretched hands, letting yourself be seen and witnessed and adored. You're exhausted. Your shoulders ache. Your feet are developing the promised blisters, and you've never felt more alive. By the time you return to the palace, the sun has climbed high enough to warm the stones. The cold of the longest night is already becoming a memory. You dismiss your attendants and stand alone in a small courtyard where no one can see you, letting the sunlight wash over your face. You did it. You commanded the sun, or at least you convinced everyone that you did, which amounts to the same thing when it comes to power and belief in the elaborate fiction that holds civilization together. Tomorrow, you'll deal with the aftermath, the political implications, the economic opportunities, the religious expectations, but right now, in this moment, you just stand in the sunlight and breathe, and exist as a person rather than a god. Fringe fact time. Some scholars believe that ancient Egyptian solstice ceremonies may have included hallucinogenic compounds to enhance the spiritual experience for both priests and possibly the pharaoh himself. Residues found in ceremonial vessels at some temple sites contain traces of substances that could induce altered states of consciousness. Whether this was religious enhancement or just ancient stress management, we'll probably never know for sure. The days after the winter solstice feel different. Not dramatically, but in subtle ways that accumulate like water filling a cup. You notice it first in how people look at you. Before, they bowed because protocol demanded it. Now they bow because they want to, because they saw something that transformed their pharaoh from political necessity into genuine article of faith. You're sitting in a council meeting that should be boring, listening to reports about grain storage and Nile flood predictions, when you realise that no one is arguing with you. Not because you've said anything particularly wise or commanding, just because now, after the solstice, disagreeing with you feels uncomfortably close to disagreeing with the gods themselves. One of your advisors, an old man who served since your father's reign, proposes a temple expansion that will cost enormous resources. Before the solstice, he would have presented detailed arguments and cost-benefit analyses. Now he simply says, "After witnessing your divine command of Ra, we must honour the gods with appropriate monuments." And everyone nods, because what are you going to say? Actually, I can't really command Ra, that was just sophisticated stagecraft and astronomical luck. The thing about claiming divine power is that it works until it doesn't, and then it fails spectacularly. You've boxed yourself into a position where you need to keep delivering miracles, or at least the appearance of miracles, regularly enough to maintain belief, but not so frequently that people start noticing the patterns. You approve the temple expansion because refusing would raise questions you don't want to answer. But later, alone in your private chambers, you pull out the astronomical charts your priests created. Years of observations, carefully recorded positions of stars and sun and planets, all of it leading to that single moment of perfect alignment. The charts are beautiful in their complexity. Lines and calculations and notes written in hands belonging to astronomers long dead. Their life's work preserved on papyrus because what they discovered was too valuable to lose. These are the real miracles, you think. Not divine intervention, but human persistence. The stubborn refusal to accept "I don't know" as a final answer. You trace one calculation with your finger, following the logic of an astronomer who figured out how to predict solar positions years in advance, using nothing but patience and a stick planted in the ground. His name is lost, but his work remains, tucked into these charts that make your divine authority possible. Historical fact time. Ancient Egyptian astronomers achieved remarkable precision despite lacking telescopes or advanced instruments. They tracked stellar positions by aligning architectural features with specific stars, creating a grid system that allowed them to map the night sky with impressive accuracy. The Egyptian calendar, based on observations of the star Sirius, drifted by only one day every 4 years, which is why they eventually added leap days to keep it aligned with the seasons. Your high priest requests an audience. He arrives with the same water clock that marked the solstice moment, cradling it like something precious and fragile. When he sets it before you, water drips from one chamber to another with steady measured rhythm. "Divine One," he says, and you can hear the capital letters in his voice. The people are asking when you will perform the next miracle. You want to laugh, but that would be inappropriate for someone who supposedly commands cosmic forces. Instead, you ask, what kind of miracle? They wish to know if you can bring the Nile flood early. The crops would benefit from additional water. Of course they would. But the Nile floods according to melting snows in mountains thousands of miles away. Not according to pharaonic decree. You have architects and astronomers and metallurgists. But you don't have hydrologists who can reroute an entire river system to accommodate people's expectations of your divine power. The Nile, you say carefully, flows according to ancient patterns that even the gods respect. To alter its course would be to rewrite creation itself. The priest nods slowly, processing this. You've basically just said no, but wrapped it in enough religious language that it sounds like wisdom rather than limitation. That's the game now. Finding ways to preserve your divine reputation while acknowledging the actual limits of what's possible. He leaves satisfied, and you're left with the water clock watching time drip away in measured increments. Each drop represents a moment that could go wrong, an opportunity for someone to notice that your divine powers seem suspiciously dependent on architectural alignment and careful timing. But here's what you're learning. People don't want to notice, they want to believe. They need to believe, because if their pharaoh isn't divine, if he's just a person in an elaborate costume following scripts written by long-dead astronomers, then their entire worldview collapses. So they don't look too closely, they don't ask uncomfortable questions. They take your theatrical miracles and transform them into genuine faith through sheer force of will. You spend the evening walking through the palace alone, something you technically shouldn't do, but no one stops you anymore. Guards bow and look away, giving you privacy they never offered before. You pass through rooms where builders are already working on the temple expansion your advisor proposed, moving stones that weigh more than houses, fitting them together with precision that will last millennia. This is power, you realize. Not the ability to command the sun, but the ability to command the people who command the stones, who build the monuments that maintain the illusion that you can command the sun. It's layers upon layers, each one supporting the others, creating a structure so complex and interconnected that pulling out any single piece might bring the whole thing down. You end up on a balcony overlooking the Nile, watching moonlight turn the water silver. Boats drift past carrying goods from the south, their sails catching wind that cares nothing for politics or divinity or careful astronomical calculations. The wind blows for pharaohs and farmers equally, indifferent to claims of divine authority. But the boats themselves, the trade they carry, the economy they support, all of that exists because people believe their pharaoh can maintain cosmic order. Belief creates reality in ways that transcend whether the belief itself is accurate. You can't command the sun, but because people think you can command everything else. A servant appears with wine and food you didn't request. They set it down silently and withdraw, and you realize this is how it will be now. People anticipating your needs, reading divine will into your every gesture, transforming you from person into symbol, without ever asking if that's what you wanted. You drink the wine, it's excellent, probably the best in Egypt automatically sent to you, because why would a living god drink anything less than the best? You don't remember wine tasting like responsibility before, but it does now. Every swallow carries the weight of expectations you can't fully meet and can't afford to disappoint. The moon continues its arc across the sky, following patterns mapped by the same astronomers who made your divine performance possible. They knew the moon's path as intimately as you know the corridors of your palace, and that they used that knowledge to predict tides and seasons and the best times for planting. Practical magic built from observation, and mathematics rather than divine revelation. You wonder what they would think, those patient astronomers, if they knew their careful work would be transformed into proof of divine kingship. Would they be proud, amused, disturbed? Their charts and calculations created a framework for power they never held themselves, gifted to you by centuries of intellectual labour you had nothing to do with. Historical fact time. The transition of astronomical knowledge from practical tool to religious symbol happened gradually across many cultures. In Mesopotamia, priests who tracked celestial movements gained enormous power because they could predict eclipses, transforming natural phenomena into demonstrations of divine favour, or anger. The line between understanding how things work and claiming to control them has always been thinner than most people realise. You finish the wine and head back inside, walking past guards who bow so deeply they nearly fold in half. Your bedchamber feels larger than it did before the solstice, as if your expanded divine status requires more space. Or maybe you're just more aware of the emptiness now, the isolation that comes with being transformed from person into symbol. Sleep doesn't come easily. When it finally arrives, you dream of mirrors endlessly reflecting, each one showing a slightly different version of yourself, until you can't tell which reflection is real and which are just light bouncing between polished surfaces. The weeks that follow the winter solstice bring changes that ripple through Egyptian society like wind across water. Some are obvious, visible, the kind of shifts anyone can see. Others are subtle, buried in the way people speak or hesitate or reframe their questions to accommodate your new divine status. Your architects present plans for monuments on a scale that makes previous construction projects look modest. They are talking about obelisks that will touch the sky, temples that will require generations to complete, statues of you that will make the existing colossal figures look like practice sketches. The divine miracle of the solstice must be commemorated, they say, and really, how are you supposed to argue with that? So you approve projects that will consume enormous resources, employ thousands of workers, and reshape the landscape of Egypt for the next several centuries. All because you stood in the right place at the right time and let sunlight bounce off some well-positioned mirrors. The economic impact is immediate and complicated. Suddenly, there's enormous demand for skilled stoneworkers, metallurgists, artists, and engineers. Wages rise as workers realise their skills are valuable and in short supply. Small villages empty out as young men head to the major construction sites seeking employment and adventure. Your economic advisors are simultaneously pleased and worried. Their construction projects stimulate trade and create employment, but they also strain resources and disrupt traditional patterns of agricultural labour. Some farming regions report labour shortages as workers abandon fields for construction sites that pay better and offer more excitement than planting barley. One advisor, brave or foolish enough to voice concerns, suggests that perhaps the commemorative monuments could be scaled back slightly to avoid economic disruption. The room goes pungent. Everyone looks at you to see how you'll respond to what amounts to indirect criticism of your divine miracle. This is the political tightrope you're walking now. You need advisors who will tell you truth, but you also need to maintain the divine mystique that makes your rule seem natural and inevitable. The gods' work, you say slowly, must be balanced with human needs. Ra himself provides for the crops each day. We honour him not by neglecting his gifts, but by managing them wisely. It's a compromise wrapped in theological language, and everyone relaxes slightly. You've found a way to scale back the most excessive proposals without admitting that maybe, just maybe, the whole divine power thing has some practical limitations. But here's what's really happening. What you're starting to understand in quiet moments, when the priests and advisors and eager petitioners finally leave you alone, you've created a feedback loop. The solstice miracle generated genuine belief, which generates more elaborate monuments, which will require increasingly impressive demonstrations of divine power to justify, which will require even better astronomical calculations and architectural planning, which will create even larger monuments, and on until either the system sustains itself indefinitely, or collapses spectacularly when someone finally notices the foundation is made of extremely accurate mathematics rather than actual divine intervention. Historical fact time. Many ancient civilizations developed similar feedback loops between astronomical knowledge, monumental architecture, and political authority. The Maya built elaborate pyramids aligned with celestial events and developed one of the most sophisticated calendar systems in the pre-modern world, all in service of demonstrating that their rulers could read and influence cosmic patterns. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they found cities full of monuments built to astronomical precision by people who could predict eclipses centuries in advance, but who still thought their kings could talk to gods. You're walking through Memphis one afternoon, surrounded by guards who are themselves surrounded by crowds who just want to see you, when a child asks a question that stops you in your tracks. Can you make it rain? The question is innocent, asked with the pure curiosity of someone too young to understand that some questions are dangerous. Her mother pulls her back, horrified, but you motion for them to approach. You kneel down, looking at the girl directly. She has dark eyes that reflect the afternoon sun and absolutely no guile whatsoever. The rain, you say gently, comes when Ra commands it, not when I do. I serve the gods as you serve me, each of us in our proper place. It's the most honest answer you've given anyone in weeks, and the crowd loves it. They hear humility, piety, an acknowledgement of divine hierarchy. They don't hear what you actually said, which is basically, no, I can't control the weather, let's all be reasonable here. The little girl nods solemnly and asks, then who tells Re when to make it rain? You want to say atmospheric pressure systems and seasonal wind patterns, but that seems unlikely to satisfy a 6-year-old or maintain your divine image. So instead you say, Ra knows what the land needs because he watches over it every day, just as I watch over Egypt because Ra allows me to share his vision. It's nonsense, but it's the right kind of nonsense, the kind that sounds profound while meaning very little. The mother thanks you with tears in her eyes, and you continue your walk, feeling oddly tired. That evening, alone again because gods apparently don't get much social time, you stand in your private garden watching stars emerge as daylight fades. The stars follow paths you can predict now thanks to your astronomer's charts. No mystery there, just geometric certainty played out on a cosmic scale. But knowing how things work doesn't make them less beautiful. The stars are still bright, still distant, still following their ancient patterns whether anyone understands those patterns or not. Knowledge didn't diminish them. It just changed your relationship with what you see. Maybe that's what's happening to you, you think. You're not less divine because you know how the solstice miracle works. You're just different divine. The kind that comes from understanding rather than mystery, from human achievement rather than cosmic intervention. Or maybe you're just getting better at justifying the elaborate lie you're living. Fringe fact time. There are stories, probably apocryphal but fun, about ancient Egyptian priests who were caught faking miracles and were surprisingly not executed. Instead, they were often promoted because the ability to create convincing divine manifestations was considered a valuable skill regardless of whether the gods were actually involved. Apparently ancient Egypt was more pragmatic about these things than later civilizations. The miracle isn't the mechanism, it's the effect. The Nile floods right on schedule that year, exactly when the old astronomical charts predicted it would, and people treat this as confirmation of your divine authority. Never mind that the Nile has flooded on essentially the same schedule for thousands of years regardless of who sits on the throne. This year it's proof that Ra favours your rule. You accept the credit gracefully because what else are you going to do? Explain hydrology and Ethiopian snowmelt to people who just want to believe their God King is keeping the cosmic order intact. The harvest that follows is abundant, probably due to normal weather patterns and good farming practices, but everyone credits your divine oversight. Offerings pour into the temples. Your priests grow wealthy, your architects get even more ambitious. The feedback loop accelerates. And you stand in rooms full of people who think you're divine and feel increasingly human. You wear crowns that are supposed to channel cosmic power and feel mostly headaches. You perform rituals designed to maintain universal order and think about how much your feet hurt. But here's the strange part. It doesn't matter. The gap between who you are and what people believe you are is so vast now that your actual feelings and limitations have become irrelevant. You've been transformed into an idea that exists independent of your physical reality. A symbol so powerful that your human characteristics are just amusing footnotes to your divine narrative. You are Pharaoh. You commanded the sun to return from darkness. Everyone saw it happen. The fact that commanded was really just stood in the right place while physics and architecture did their thing is beside the point. You wake one morning and realise you've stopped arguing with yourself about it. You've accepted the role, the lie, the performance. Not because you believe it yourself, but because everyone else believes it. And their belief creates a reality more powerful than any individual truth. This is how divine kingship works, you understand now. Not through actual divine intervention, but through collective agreement to treat the performance as reality. The strength isn't in the claim itself, but in everyone's willingness to support the claim, to build monuments and systems and institutions around it until the fiction becomes functionally indistinguishable from fact. You command the sun because everyone agrees that you command the sun, because you stood in a carefully designed building at a precisely calculated moment and let them watch light behave exactly as centuries of patient observation predicted it would. And that's enough. That's how you become divine. The years pass and the memory of the solstice miracle doesn't fade so much as crystallize, becoming legend even while you're still alive to remember what actually happened. New temples rise, each one aligned to capture celestial events with increasing precision. Your astronomers continue their observations, refining calculations, discovering new patterns in the movements of stars and planets. You're older now. The crown doesn't weigh less, but you've gotten stronger carrying it. Your hair has streaks of grey that your servants carefully hide with oils and dyes because gods apparently don't age visibly. The fiction must be maintained. A young prince, your grandson, comes to you with questions. He's heard stories about the solstice miracle, embellished by time and retelling, until they bear only passing resemblance to what actually happened. In the popular version, you literally stopped the sun in the sky and held it there with your hands until Ra agreed to return from the underworld. Did you really? He asks, with the skepticism of youth not yet trained out of him. You consider how to answer. You could perpetuate the myth. Let him believe his grandfather truly commanded cosmic forces. Or you could tell him truth, risk disillusionment, but give him a chance to understand how power actually works. Come with me, you say. You take him to your private chambers and pull out the astronomical charts. Charts that have grown more elaborate over the years, filled with additional observations and refined calculations. You show him how the astronomers tracked stellar positions night after night, year after year, how they discovered that celestial movements follow predictable patterns, how they used those patterns to determine exactly when and where the sun would rise on the winter solstice. You show him the architectural plans for Karnak, the precise angles and alignments, the mirror positions calculated to fraction degree accuracy. You explain how light behaves, how it can be reflected and focused, how understanding these principles allows you to create effects that look miraculous to people who don't understand the mechanisms. The boy is quiet for a long time processing this. Finally, he asks, "So you didn't really command the sun?" "I commanded human ingenuity," you say. "I commanded centuries of accumulated knowledge. I commanded the greatest minds in Egypt working toward a single purpose. The result was more impressive than any individual miracle could be, because it was real. The sun returned not because a god willed it, but because the universe follows laws we can understand and use." His face goes through several expressions: confusion, disappointment, then something that might be awe of a different kind. "That's better," he says it eventually. "That means we can do it again. We can keep doing it. We don't have to wait for gods to favour us. We just have to figure out how things work." You smile. You've never been more proud of anyone in your life. Historical fact time. The knowledge accumulated by ancient Egyptian astronomers and mathematicians wasn't lost when Egyptian civilization declined. It was preserved, translated, passed down through Greek, Arab, and eventually European scholars. The Ptolemaic model of planetary motion, used in Europe until the Renaissance, was built on observations and calculations that began in ancient Egypt. The mathematical insights that allowed Egyptian architects to align temples with astronomical precision eventually contributed to modern science's understanding of celestial mechanics. The gods may have been fictional, but the knowledge was real, and it survived. Your grandson becomes an eager student of astronomy and mathematics, spending hours with the old priest astronomers who maintained the observational tradition. You watch him learn to use surveying instruments to calculate angles to predict celestial events. He's learning real power, the kind that doesn't depend on anyone's belief or worship. But you're also careful to teach him the other lesson, the one about performance and belief and collective fiction. Because here's what you've learned after decades wearing the crown. Both things are necessary. You need the knowledge, the real understanding of how the universe works, but you also need people to believe in something larger than themselves. something that gives their lives meaning and purpose. The trick is holding both truths simultaneously without letting them cancel each other out. You can command the sun through careful application of physics and astronomy, and that makes you divine, not because gods are real, but because the ability to understand and manipulate natural forces is its own kind of divinity. Just one that humans can achieve through patience and intelligence rather than waiting for cosmic intervention. The temples continue to rise. Each one incorporates new astronomical alignments based on observations your astronomers continue making every clear night. The construction projects employ thousands, create economic prosperity, drive innovations in engineering and mathematics, all built on the foundation of a miracle that was really just extremely sophisticated stagecraft and centuries of accumulated knowledge. But it works. It holds civilization together. It gives people purpose and meaning and something to believe in, and the knowledge that makes it all possible, that's preserved and passed down and refined by each generation. You're standing on another balcony watching another sunset when you realize this might be your actual legacy, not the monuments or the political achievements or the successful maintenance of divine authority, but this, the preservation of knowledge, the understanding that humans can figure out how the universe works and use that understanding to create meaning and beauty and structures that last. The sun sets on schedule, following patterns your astronomers mapped with patient observation. You don't command it to set any more than you commanded it to rise all of those years ago, but you understand it, and that understanding built an empire. That might be enough. Fringe fact time. There are some scholars who argue that ancient Egyptian rulers knew perfectly well they weren't actually divine, but maintained the fiction for political purposes, with everyone from the pharaoh to the peasants participating in what was essentially an elaborate social contract. Other scholars find this interpretation too cynical, and argue that belief and performance weren't clearly separated in ancient minds the way they are for modern skeptics. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, in that complicated space where what you believe and what you perform and what you know become so tangled that separating them becomes impossible and maybe unnecessary. Your grandson asks one final question before you dismiss him. When I become pharaoh, will I have to command the sun too? You'll have to command something, you say. Whether it's the sun or the Nile or the stars or something we haven't thought of yet. Pharaohs don't just rule Egypt, they rule the cosmic order. Or at least they have to make people believe they do. How? By understanding more than everyone else understands. By learning everything the astronomers and mathematicians and architects can teach you. And then by standing in exactly the right place at exactly the right time and letting everyone watch while the universe does what it was always going to do anyway. He thinks about this, then grins. Basically, you're saying I should study really hard and then take credit for physics? You laugh. Genuinely laugh for the first time in longer than you can remember. Yes, you say. That's exactly what I'm saying. That's how you become a god. The end comes slowly, as most things do when you pay attention. Not your end. You'll live several more years, long enough to see your grandson grow into a thoughtful young man who splits his time between astronomical observations and political training. But the end of something, some phase or period or way of understanding your role that you've carried for decades, it happens on another solstice, winter again, the cycle completing. You're older now, slower. Your hands shake sometimes with age or tremor, or just the accumulated weight of years pretending to be divine. But you make the journey to Karnak one more time because the performance must continue. The fiction must be maintained. The crowd is larger than ever. Word has spread throughout Egypt and beyond that the pharaoh who commanded the sun will perform the miracle again. People have travelled from the Mediterranean coast, from Nubia to the south, even from distant lands whose names you barely recognise. They all want to witness divine power made manifest. Your grandson stands beside you this time, learning his role, understanding both the mechanism and the meaning. He knows about the mirrors now, the astronomical calculations, the architectural precision, but he also understands why the performance matters, why people need to believe in something larger than themselves. The preparations are familiar, almost comforting. The same positions, the same calculations, the same careful alignment of every element, but everything feels different through the lens of age and experience. You're not nervous this time. You're not worried about failure. You've done this before and you'll do it again, and the universe will cooperate because you understand it. The darkness before dawn feels deeper now, or maybe your eyes are just weaker. The cold penetrates your robes despite their layers, settling into bones that ache more each year. But you stand straight, arms raised, face arranged in divine serenity, because that's the job. That's what pharaohs do. The sun rises on schedule exactly when the charts predicted it would. The light enters the temple, bounces between mirrors, converges on the statue of Ra with blazing intensity. The crowd erupts in awe and relief and joy. Your grandson watches with wide eyes, seeing the performance from the inside for the first time, understanding both the mechanics and the miracle. And you feel tired, not disappointed or disillusioned or cynical, just tired. You've maintained this fiction for so long that it's become part of who you are, inseparable from your actual identity. You've been pharaoh longer than you were anything else. The performance has become reality through sheer repetition and collective belief. But you're also ready to pass it on, ready to let your grandson carry the crown and maintain the mirrors and stand in the appointed place when the sun returns from darkness. He'll do it differently, probably better. Each generation finds new ways to present old truths, new languages for ancient knowledge. After the ceremony, after the crowds disperse and the offerings are collected, and the priests congratulate you on another successful miracle, you return to your chambers alone. You dismiss your attendants, wave away the servants, sit in silence watching light fade from the sky. You think about the little girl with her wilting flowers, about your grandson learning to read the stars, about all the people throughout Egypt who went to sleep tonight believing their pharaoh commanded the sun, and all the astronomers and architects who know better, but maintain the fiction because it holds everything together. The truth isn't simple. You did command the sun in a way. You commanded human knowledge accumulated over centuries. You commanded the patient work of observers who tracked celestial movements night after night. You commanded the genius of architects who could translate astronomical data into stone and bronze and perfect angles of reflection. That's a kind of divinity too, maybe the only kind that actually exists. A servant enters quietly, leaving a tray of food and wine. You wave them away before they can bow or speak. You need this silence, this space to be just yourself without the weight of performance. The wine tastes different now than it did when you were young. Or maybe you taste it differently. Either way, it's good. You drink slowly, watching stars emerge as the sky darkens. Each star follows a path your astronomers have mapped. No mystery there, just patient observation and careful calculation. But knowing their paths doesn't make them less beautiful, doesn't make the sky less vast. You think about all the pharaohs who came before you standing in similar rooms, looking at similar stars, carrying similar burdens. Did they believe their own divine claims? Or did they all eventually arrive at this same understanding, this recognition that divinity is something people create together through belief and performance and the careful maintenance of useful fictions? There are no records of such doubts. If other pharaohs questioned their own divinity, they kept it to themselves. That's probably wise. Some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud, even to yourself. But you're old now, old enough to examine uncomfortable questions, old enough to see how the machinery works and appreciate its complexity rather than just maintaining its operation. You've lived inside the divine performance so long that you've earned the right to think about what it means. Historical fact time. Many ancient rulers claimed divine status or divine sanction, but the mechanisms varied. Roman emperors were deified after death. Chinese emperors claimed the mandate of heaven, but could lose it through misrule. Japanese emperors were considered descendants of the sun goddess. Egyptian pharaohs were unique in claiming to be living gods during their reign, requiring constant reinforcement through ritual and monument. The system worked for over 3,000 years, which suggests there was something profoundly effective about it, regardless of whether the claims were literally true. You finish the wine and set the cup aside. Your hands are steadier now than they were this morning. The performance is over, the mask are removed, and you can just be a tired old man with aching joints and too many responsibilities. Tomorrow there will be petitions to hear, judgments to render, monuments to approve. You'll wear the crown again, speak with divine authority, accept offerings as if gods truly walk among humans. The performance continues because it must, because too many people depend on it, because pulling back the curtain would cause more harm than maintaining the illusion. But tonight, in this quiet moment, you're just yourself. Not pharaoh, not god, not symbol. Just a person who learned to stand in the right place at the right time and let everyone see what they needed to see. That's enough. That has to be enough. You sleep deeply that night, dreamlessly. The kind of sleep that comes when you've carried something heavy for a long time and finally set it down, even if just for a few hours. The years continue to unfold. Your grandson grows into the role you're preparing for him, studying astronomy and architecture, while also learning statecraft and religious protocol. He's sharper than you were at his age, and he sees connections you missed. One evening he proposes a new alignment, a temple that will capture the summer solstice in addition to the winter one, creating a paired set of miracles that reinforce each other. If we can demonstrate control over both the longest night and the longest day, he explains, charts spread across the table between you, it suggests complete mastery of the solar cycle, not just the single dramatic moment. You study his calculations. They are sound, innovative even. He's found angles and alignments you wouldn't have considered. He's going to be better at this than you were. That should probably worry you, but instead it fills you with something that might be pride or might just be relief. The knowledge continues. The system persists. The framework you helped build will outlast you. Build it, you say. But remember, the performance matters as much as the precision. Give them something beautiful to witness. He nods, understanding both the technical and theatrical requirements. He gets it. He'll maintain the divine fiction while knowing exactly how it works, just as you have. The tradition passes down, encoded in astronomical charts and architectural plans, an unspoken understanding about the gap between performance and reality. Construction begins on the new temple complex. You visit the site occasionally, watching massive stones hauled into position, seeing your grandson consult with architects and astronomers who explain angles and reflections and celestial mechanics. The workers treat him with the same reverence they show you, seeing divine authority in training rather than a young man learning an elaborate trick. The trick, you think, is that it's not really a trick. The temples work, the alignments are real, the astronomical knowledge is genuine. You're just letting people interpret natural phenomena as divine will, rather than explaining the actual mechanisms. That's not fraud so much as strategic presentation of accurate information. Or maybe that's just how you justify it to yourself after decades of performance. Fringe fact time. Some evidence suggests that ancient Egyptian priests ran what amounted to schools of astronomical observation and architectural engineering, passing down techniques through carefully guarded apprenticeships. Knowledge was power, and maintaining some mystery about how the miracles worked helped preserve that power. But the knowledge itself was real, empirical, based on careful observation rather than divine revelation. The priests were scientists who dressed like mystics, or maybe mystics who thought like scientists. The line between the two was blurrier in ancient minds than it is today. Your health begins to decline gradually. Nothing dramatic, just the slow erosion of time taking its toll. Your joints ache more, your vision grows slightly dim, your breath comes harder after climbing stairs. You're not dying, not yet, but you're definitely aging, and age is something gods aren't supposed to do, so your servants work harder to conceal it. More oils and dyes for your hair. Carefully chosen lighting for public appearances. Shorter processions, more frequent rests disguised as ceremonial pauses. The performance continues even as the performer weakens. You wonder sometimes what will happen when you finally die. Will people believe you have just returned to the realm of the gods? Will they notice that divine pharaohs die just like everyone else? Will it shake anyone's faith, or will the system simply absorb your death as it absorbed your birth, incorporating it into the larger narrative of divine cycles and eternal renewal? Your grandson asks you the same question one evening, phrasing it more delicately, but essentially wondering how to handle the eventual revelation that gods are mortal. You make it part of the story, you tell him. Pharaohs don't die. They join Ra's eternal journey across the sky. The living pharaoh is Ra's presence on Earth, but when one pharaoh dies, Ra simply chooses a new vessel. The divinity continues even as the individual changes. He considers this. So the office is divine, not the person. The office, the knowledge, the system. All of it together creates something larger than any individual pharaoh. You're not just a man claiming to be a god. You're the living representative of centuries of accumulated wisdom, the focal point of a civilization's understanding of cosmic order. That's real power, even if it's not literal godhood. But is it honest? The question hangs between you. Is the one you've been avoiding for decades the one that matters most and resists easy answers? It's honest about what matters, you say finally. The astronomical knowledge is real. The architecture works. The system creates order and prosperity. Whether you personally can command the sun is less important than whether Egypt thrives under your rule. The divine claim is a tool for governance. And if it makes people's lives better, if it holds civilization together, then maybe the literal truth is less important than the practical effect. Your grandson doesn't look entirely satisfied with this answer, but he nods. He'll wrestle with the same questions you have, come to his own understanding, find his own balance between performance and truth. That's part of the burden each pharaoh carries, the knowledge that divinity is something you perform rather than something you are. But performing it well, maintaining it with skill and dedication, passing down the knowledge that makes it possible, that's its own kind of sacred work. The temple complex nears completion. Your grandson conducts the first summer solstice ceremony with precision and confidence that make you realize you're no longer essential to the system. He stands in the appointed place, the light enters the temple exactly as calculated, the mirrors flash and converge, the crowd erupts in awe. He's performed his first miracle, and he did it without your help. You watch from a position of honor but not centrality, seeing yourself reflected in his careful stance and measured gestures. He's better at the performance than you were at his age. The tradition evolves, improves, continues. That evening he finds you in the same spot where you've spent so many quiet moments, looking out over the Nile as darkness settles across Egypt. It worked, he says, and you can hear the relief and exhilaration in his voice. Of course it worked. You calculated correctly, positioned, the mirrors precisely, timed everything perfectly. The universe is reliable. That's what makes this possible. The people believe I commanded the sun. Did you? He looks at you, uncertain how to answer. You smile, recognizing the confusion you felt after your first performance. You commanded centuries of accumulated knowledge. You commanded human ingenuity and persistence. You commanded the greatest architectural achievement of your generation. If that's not divine, I don't know what is. He sits beside you, both of you watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Stars that follow paths you both can predict now, mapped and calculated and understood. No less beautiful for being understood, no less useful for being explicable. Grandfather, he says quietly, thank you for teaching me both things, the knowledge and the performance. I understand now that we need both. You nod. That's all you ever hoped to pass down, not just the astronomical charts and architectural techniques, but the understanding that power requires both substance and theatre, both knowledge and belief, both truth and useful fiction. The Nile flows below, following patterns shaped by distant mountains and seasonal rains and gravitational forces that neither you nor your grandson will ever fully understand. But you don't need to understand everything to appreciate the river's beauty, to use its floods for agriculture, to build a civilization along its banks. Maybe divinity works the same way. You don't have to be literally divine to fulfill divinity's purpose. You just have to stand in the right place at the right time and give people something to believe in. That's the real secret of the solstice miracle, the one you can never say aloud. The sun doesn't return because the pharaoh commands it. The sun returns because that's what the sun does, following laws as old as creation. But by understanding those laws, by predicting them with perfect precision, by creating monuments that make natural phenomena look like divine will, you give people a narrative that makes sense of their world, that gives them hope and order and something larger than themselves to believe in. And maybe, in the end, that's the most divine thing any human can do. The final years pass more quickly than you expected. Time seems to accelerate as you age, days blurring together while maintaining their individual distinctness. You watch your grandson perfect his role, develop his own innovations, add new temples and new alignments to the network of astronomical monuments you helped create. Egypt prospers. The Nile floods on schedule. The harvests are abundant. Trade flourishes. The political order remains stable. All the practical measures of successful rule trend positive, and people credit your divine authority for this prosperity, even though you're barely involved in day-to-day governance anymore. That's another secret of divine kingship. Once established, the system runs itself. People want to believe, so they interpret everything through the lens of belief. Good harvests prove divine favour. Successful trade demonstrates cosmic order. The entire civilization becomes invested in maintaining the fiction because the fiction serves everyone's interests. You're walking through one of your temples on a day that feels significant, though you can't explain why. The morning light streams through carefully calculated openings, illuminating hieroglyphs that tell the story of your reign. There you are, carved in stone, commanding the sun, receiving the Nile's flood, maintaining Mayat, the cosmic balance that keeps chaos at bay. The carvings show you as you should be, not as you are. Young, strong, perfectly proportioned, eternally divine. Reality and representation have diverged so completely that the stone version of you seems more real than the aged man studying it. Maybe that's appropriate. Maybe the stone version is who you really are, the essential pharaoh stripped of human limitation. Or maybe you're just getting philosophical in your old age. A young priest approaches, bowing deeply. Divine One, the morning offerings have been accepted. Ra is pleased with your devotion. You accept this with a nod. Not bothering to point out that Ra is pleased actually means the offerings burned properly and nobody made any mistakes in the ritual. The priest believes in the literal divine interpretation, and that belief makes him happy, gives his life meaning and purpose. Who are you to take that away with awkward truth-telling? Besides, maybe he's not entirely wrong. If gods exist as collective belief made manifest, then Ra is pleased. The accumulated faith of millions of Egyptians over thousands of years has created something real, even if it's not real in the way most people think. You're definitely getting philosophical in your old age. Historical fact time. The Egyptian concept of Ma'at encompassed truth, justice, cosmic order, and balance. Maintaining Ma'at was the pharaoh's primary responsibility, more important than military conquest or even monument building. Interestingly, Ma'at was both a goddess and an abstract principle, suggesting that ancient Egyptians understood the relationship between personification and concept in a more sophisticated ways than we often credit them with. The pharaoh didn't just worship Ma'at, he embodied it, performed it, made it real through his actions and the rituals he maintained. You spend more time alone as your health continues its gradual decline. Not dramatically ill, just slowly unwinding, like a water clock running dry. Your grandson handles most public appearances now, and he's so good at it that people barely notice the transition. The divine authority flows from you to him as smoothly as sunlight flowing down temple corridors, redirected but not diminished. One night, you dream about the first solstice ceremony. In the dream, everything is the same but different. The calculations are visible as glowing lines in the air. The mirrors are transparent, revealing the paths light takes as it bounces between them. You can see the mechanism and the miracle simultaneously, understanding that they're the same thing viewed from different perspectives. You wake feeling peaceful, more settled than you have in years. Something has resolved itself in your mind, some conflict between what you know and what you perform. They're not opposites, they're partners, each incomplete without the other. Knowledge without performance is sterile, locked away in astronomical charts nobody uses. Performance without knowledge is empty, theatre without substance, but together they create something larger, a civilization that thrives because its people believe in cosmic order, and that belief is grounded in genuine understanding of how the universe works. That's the real miracle of the solstice ceremony. Not that you commanded the sun, but that you created a system that translates astronomical knowledge into cultural meaning, that turns observations about planetary motion into narratives about divine authority, that makes physics feel sacred. You stand at the window of your chamber, looking out over Thebes. The city stretches away in all directions, thousands of buildings housing hundreds of thousands of people. They're sleeping now, most of them dreaming their own dreams, living their own lives. And somewhere in each of their minds is the knowledge that their pharaoh maintains Mayat, keeps the cosmic order balanced, ensures that the sun returns each morning. You do ensure that. Not through literal divine power, but through the maintenance of systems, agricultural, economic, political, religious, that keep society functioning. The divine claim isn't a lie, it's a translation, converting complex governance into simple narrative, turning administrative competence into cosmic authority. The people don't need to understand tax policy or agricultural planning or diplomatic negotiations. They need to believe someone is in charge who can keep chaos at bay. And you've given them that belief, grounded it in spectacular demonstrations of astronomical knowledge, reinforced it with monuments that will last millennia. That's enough. That's what pharaohs do. The end, when it finally comes, isn't dramatic. No grand pronouncement, no final miracle, just a gradual fading, like sunset rather than eclipse. You spend your last days in the palace surrounded by family and priests and the accumulated comforts of a long and successful reign. Your grandson sits beside your bed, holding the same astronomical charts you showed him years ago. He's added his own notations, refined calculations, discovered new patterns. The knowledge continues, evolving and improving with each generation. The summer solstice ceremony is planned for next week, he says. The calculations are perfect. Everything is prepared. You nod. Of course it is. He's meticulous, even better with the details than you were. The tradition is safe in his hands. Remember, you say, voice weaker than you'd like but still clear. It's not about the mirrors or the calculations. Those are tools. What matters is giving people something to believe in, something true enough to build a civilization on. I understand, and you can see that he does. Not just intellectually, but deeply, in the way that only comes from performing the role yourself, standing in that position of impossible authority and finding ways to make it real. Tie enters, your wife of so many decades that you can barely remember life before her. She's aged as you have, though the artists who carve her image keep her eternally young, just as they do with you. In stone, you're both divine and perfect. In reality, you're old and tired and grateful for each other's company. She sits on the other side of the bed, taking your hand. Her fingers are warm, familiar, real, in a way that crowns and temples and astronomical alignments never quite manage to be. Do you think, you ask her quietly, that we did good work? She considers this seriously, as she considers everything. You gave people hope. You gave them order. You gave them reasons to believe their world made sense. That's good work. Even though you're not literally divine. She smiles. You gave them true things in forms they could understand and believe in. The astronomy is real. The architecture works. The agricultural system functions. You translated knowledge into faith and faith into prosperity. What's more divine than that? You want to argue, to express some final doubt, but you're too tired, and she's probably right anyway. She usually is. The room grows dimmer, though you're not sure if that's the light fading or your vision failing. Either way, it feels appropriate. The sun sets for everyone eventually, even pharaohs, even people who once commanded its return. Your last thought before sleep takes you is about the little girl with her wilting flowers, about your grandson learning to read stars, about all the people throughout Egypt who believe in cosmic order because you gave them reasons to believe. That's divinity enough. Historical fact time. Amenhotep III was succeeded by his son Amenhotep IV, who later changed his name to Akhenaten and attempted to revolutionize Egyptian religion by promoting worship of a single god, the Aten. This dramatic break with tradition lasted only as long as Akhenaten's reign. After his death, traditional worship was restored, and Amenhotep III's carefully maintained system of divine kingship continued in essentially unchanged form for another 1,000 years. The knowledge he helped preserve, astronomical, architectural, mathematical, survived even longer, passing eventually into Greek and Arab scholarship and ultimately contributing to modern science. The divine claims faded. The knowledge remained. The funeral ceremonies elaborate, befitting someone who commanded the sun. Your body is mummified with care, prepared for an eternal journey. The tomb in the Valley of the Kings has been prepared for years, carved deep into the bedrock, painted with scenes of your divine journey through the underworld. Your grandson, now pharaoh in his own right, performs the ceremonies with perfect precision. He speaks the words, makes the offerings, maintains the narrative of divine transition. The old pharaoh has joined Ra's eternal journey. The new pharaoh receives the divine authority. The system continues unbroken. Thousands attend the funeral procession. They line the streets, weeping genuinely for a ruler who gave them prosperity and meaning. They believe you were divine, and their belief makes it true in the only way that really matters, in its effects on their lives and civilization. The astronomers and architects attend too, the ones who know how the miracles actually work. They maintain the knowledge, preparing to teach the next generation, ensuring that future pharaohs will continue to command celestial events through careful calculation rather than divine intervention. Both groups, believers and knowledge keepers, are necessary. Neither is wrong. They are just seeing the same reality from different perspectives, and both perspectives serve important purposes. Your grandson, the new pharaoh, stands at the tomb entrance as your sarcophagus is sealed away. He's young still, but he carries the weight well. He's learned both lessons, how to calculate angles with precision and how to stand with divine authority. He'll maintain the system you helped build, perhaps improve it, certainly pass it down to his own successors. The sun sets over the Valley of the Kings, following paths that astronomers mapped and predicted. It will rise tomorrow exactly on schedule, commanded by no one and everyone, following cosmic laws that humans discovered by patient observation. And in temples throughout Egypt, priests will credit the new pharaoh with maintaining cosmic order, with ensuring that the sun returns. They'll be right in a way. The new pharaoh maintains the systems, educational, architectural, astronomical, religious, that give people a framework for understanding their place in the universe. That's what pharaohs do. That's what divine kingship means. Not literal command over cosmic forces, but the maintenance of knowledge and ritual and belief that keeps civilization functioning. The stars emerge as darkness deepens, each one following its predicted path. The same stars Amenhotep III studied, that his astronomers mapped, that his grandson will observe and measure and use to maintain his own divine authority. The knowledge continues, the performance continues, the civilization continues. That's the real miracle of the winter solstice. Not that one man commanded the sun, but that humans learned to understand celestial mechanics well enough to predict them, brilliant enough to create spectacular demonstrations, wise enough to translate that knowledge into faith, and dedicated enough to maintain the system across generations. Amenhotep III commanded the sun by understanding it. His grandson will do the same, and far in the future, long after divine kingship has faded from memory, the astronomical knowledge they helped preserve will contribute to humanity's broader understanding of the universe. The gods may have been fictional, but what they represented, human curiosity, intellectual persistence, the drive to understand how things work, that was real and lasting. The winter solstice comes again, as it always does. The new pharaoh stands in the temple his grandfather designed, arms raised toward a statue of Ra waiting for dawn. The calculations have been checked and rechecked. The mirrors are positioned perfectly. Everything is ready. The crowd outside holds its breath, waiting for proof that cosmic order continues, that their new pharaoh possesses divine authority. The sun rises exactly on schedule. Light enters the temple, bounces between mirrors, converges with blazing intensity on the golden statue. The crowd erupts in awe and joy and relief. The young pharaoh holds his pose, arms raised, face serene, knowing exactly how the miracle works and performing it anyway because that's what pharaohs do. He commands the sun, everyone sees it happen, the system continues. And high above, indifferent to human performance and belief alike, the actual sun continues its journey across the sky, following laws that existed before humanity and will exist after. Laws that some ancient Egyptians learned to understand and used to create something that looked an awful lot like magical. Maybe that's the only magic there is, understanding how the universe works and using that understanding to create meaning and beauty and civilization. If so, then every scientist is a kind of pharaoh, and every astronomical discovery is a kind of miracle. Amenhotep III understood that. He stood in the right place at the right time and gave people reasons to believe in cosmic order. The fact that cosmic order exists as independently of anyone's belief doesn't diminish the achievement. If anything, it makes it greater. He discovered something true and found a way to make people care about it. That's the legacy he left. Not monuments, though those remain. Not political achievements, though Egypt prospered under his reign. But knowledge, preserved and passed down and built upon by each generation, growing from observations of solstice alignments into a comprehensive understanding of how the universe works. The divine pharaoh becomes a mummy in a tomb. The astronomical knowledge becomes the foundation of modern science. Both were real. Both mattered. Both were true in their own way. The sun continues its eternal journey. Humans continue trying to understand it. And sometimes, standing in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, the gap between understanding and divinity becomes so narrow it almost disappears. That's when miracles happen. That's when pharaohs command the sun. The morning after the funeral, the palace feels different. Empty in a way that has nothing to do with the number of people moving through its corridors. Your grandson, you have to stop thinking of him that way. He's Pharaoh now. Amenhotep IV sits in the throne room where you spent so many years making decisions that shaped Egypt's future. He's holding the same golden cup you drank from on that first solstice morning, decades ago. The cup is cold in his hands despite the warm morning air filtering through the window slits. He can see his reflection in the polished gold, distorted and wavering. A face that's supposed to represent divine authority but just looks young and uncertain. The high priest of Amun enters without announcement, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who knows their presence is always welcome. He's older now, ancient really, the same priest who marked time with the water clock during that first ceremony. His hands shake slightly as he bows, not from reverence but from age that refuses to pretend otherwise. "Divine One," he says, and the words sound strange directed at someone new. The preparations for the next solstice are already underway. The calculations your grandfather began must be continued. The young pharaoh nods, but inside he's thinking about something his grandfather told him in those final days. Something about the gap between what pharaohs claim and what they actually control, about the performance being as important as the substance. "Tell me," he says slowly, "did my grandfather ever doubt? Did he ever question whether what we do is right?" The old priest's face doesn't change expression, but something shifts in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or relief that someone finally asked the question aloud. "Your grandfather understood something most pharaohs never grasp," the priest says carefully. "The divine authority we claim isn't diminished by understanding how it works. If anything, maintaining the performance while knowing the mechanism requires more strength, not less." So he knew. You all knew. The senior priests, yes. The astronomers, certainly. The architects who position the mirrors. We all know how the miracles work because we're the ones who make them work. The old priest sits without being invited, his legs no longer capable of standing through long conversations. But that knowledge doesn't make the miracles less real. It makes them more impressive. We're claiming divine authority based on genuine understanding of cosmic forces. That's better than claiming it based on nothing. The young pharaoh considers this. Outside, he can hear the city waking up. Vendors calling out their wares. Children playing in the streets. The eternal background noise of thousands of people living their lives under the assumption that someone divine is watching over them. "How many pharaohs have known?" he asks. "All of them, eventually. Some figure it out faster than others. Your grandfather was particularly quick. He saw through the performance almost immediately, but rather than rejecting it, he perfected it. He understood that the lie, if we're calling it that, serves a greater truth." Historical fact time. The relationship between Egyptian priests and pharaohs was complex and often politically fraught. Priests controlled enormous wealth through temple holdings and religious offerings. They possessed specialized knowledge that gave them significant power. The historical record suggests an understanding between priests and pharaohs, a mutual agreement to maintain certain fictions because those fictions served both groups' interests. When Akhenaten tried to break this system by promoting worship of the Aten above all other gods, the priestly establishment ultimately undermined his reforms and restored traditional practices after his death. The conversation is interrupted by the arrival of several advisors, men whose families have served the throne for generations. They bring reports that need attention, decisions that must be made, the endless administrative work that actually keeps Egypt functioning, while everyone focuses on the theatrical displays of divine authority. There's a dispute about water rights in the Delta region. Two villages claiming the same irrigation canal, both presenting compelling arguments backed by generations of tradition. The young pharaoh listens to both sides, aware that his decision will ripple through communities for years, affecting hundreds of lives. This is the real work of pharaohs, he realizes. Not commanding the sun, but making decisions about water rights and grain storage and trade agreements. The divine authority is just the framework that makes people accept those decisions without constant rebellion. He rules in favor of sharing the canal, establishing a rotation schedule based on crop needs rather than tradition. It's a practical solution that neither side loves but both can accept. Several advisors nod approvingly. He's learning. The days begin to develop a rhythm. Morning audiences where petitioners present cases. Midday consultations with astronomers and architects continuing work on temples and monuments. Afternoon meetings with military commanders and trade officials. Evening study sessions with the old priest, learning the deeper secrets of astronomical observation and architectural planning. He's being trained in two parallel curricula, the public one of ritual and ceremony, and the private one of actual knowledge and technique. Both are equally important. Both require dedication and precision. One evening, the old priest takes him to an observation chamber at the top of the palace, where previous generations of astronomers tracked stellar movements. The room is circular with carefully placed openings that frame specific portions of the sky. Charts cover the walls, layers upon layers of observations recorded over centuries. "This is where your grandfather spent many nights," the priest says, lighting oil lamps that cast warm light across the papyrus charts, learning to read the sky like a text, understanding that the stars tell stories if you know how to listen. The young pharaoh studies the charts, recognizing the mathematical precision in their construction. Each star's position recorded night after night, the slow drift of constellations tracked over decades, patterns emerging from patient observation that allow prediction of future positions. How long did it take to figure all this out? Centuries. Generations of astronomers building on their predecessors' work, each one adding observations, refining calculations, discovering new patterns. What looks like divine knowledge is actually accumulated human effort across time spans longer than individual memory. And we claim it all came from the gods. We claim to understand the gods' intentions by reading the signs they placed in the heavens. That's not entirely false. If you believe the gods created the universe with mathematical precision, then understanding that mathematics is understanding divine intention. The old priest traces one of the star paths with a trembling finger. The question isn't whether gods exist, it's whether understanding how things work diminishes their divinity or enhances it. They spend hours in that chamber, the old priest explaining calculations and observations, teaching the young pharaoh to read the sky, like his grandfather learned to read it. Outside, Egypt sleeps, unaware that their new divine ruler is basically taking an advanced astronomy lesson. Fringe fact time. Some scholars believe ancient Egyptian astronomical knowledge was far more advanced than surviving records indicate. The precision of pyramid alignments and temple orientations suggests mathematical understanding and observational techniques that may have been lost when Egyptian civilization declined. There are alignments that suggest knowledge of procession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts stellar positions over thousands of years. If ancient Egyptians understood procession, it would require observational programs spanning centuries and mathematical sophistication rivaling much later cultures. Weeks pass. The young pharaoh grows more comfortable in his role, developing his own style of governance that resembles his grandfather's but with subtle differences. He's more willing to explain his reasoning, less interested in maintaining distance between himself and his subjects. Some advisors worry he's being too accessible, undermining the divine mystique. But the people love it. They see a pharaoh who listens, who explains, who treats their concerns as worthy of divine attention. The gap between ruler and ruled narrows slightly, and nothing collapses. If anything, loyalty strengthens. He's walking through the market district one afternoon, guards keeping a respectful distance, when he overhears a conversation between two merchants, arguing about astronomical predictions. One claims that priests can predict eclipses through divine revelation. The other argues that prediction comes from mathematical calculation based on observed patterns. The young pharaoh stops, listening. Both merchants notice him simultaneously and drop to their knees, foreheads pressed to the dusty ground. "Stand up," he says gently. "Your discussion interests me. Continue." The merchants exchange nervous glances. contradicting each other in front of the divine pharaoh, suddenly seems much riskier than it did moments ago. I believe, the first merchant says carefully, that the gods reveal their intentions to the priests, who then warn us of eclipses. And I believe, the second says even more carefully, that the priests are very wise men who understand patterns in how the sun and moon move. The young pharaoh considers how to respond. His grandfather would have left the ambiguity intact, allowing both interpretations to coexist, but he's not his grandfather. You're both correct, he says. The gods created a universe that follows mathematical patterns. Understanding those patterns is understanding divine intention. The priests study those patterns with great dedication. Whether you call their knowledge divine revelation or mathematical calculation, the result is the same. Accurate predictions of celestial events. The gods provided the patterns. Humans learned to read them. Both deserve credit. The merchants bow again, apparently satisfied with this answer that manages to validate both perspectives while committing to neither. The young pharaoh continues his walk, aware that he's just performed a smaller version of the same trick his grandfather perfected, translating knowledge into terms that people can accept and believe in. That evening he practices mirror alignments in a small temple near the palace. The summer solstice is approaching, his first major ceremony since becoming pharaoh. Everything must be perfect. The mirrors must catch the light at precisely the right angles. The timing must be exact. The performance must be flawless. He adjusts bronze surfaces by fractions of degrees, checking alignments with strings and plumb lines and instruments his astronomers designed. This is meditative work, requiring focus and patience and absolute precision. Each mirror position affects how light bounces to the next mirror, creating a cascade of dependencies that must all be calculated correctly. His wife finds him there late in the evening, hands covered in bronze polish, studying reflection angles by lamplight. Sitamun is young still, younger than him, but she has a practical intelligence that cuts through complicated problems with surprising clarity. "You're worried," she observes, sitting on a stone bench near the mirrors. "The ceremony is in 5 days. If anything goes wrong, then you'll improvise. That's what pharaohs do." She watches him work for a moment. "Did your grandfather ever talk to you about doubt? About the gap between what you claim and what you actually control?" He looks up, surprised. "How did you know about that?" "Because I'm not blind, because I've watched you struggle with performing divinity while knowing the mechanisms, because it's obvious to anyone paying attention that being pharaoh means living in constant tension between reality and performance." He sets down his polishing cloth and sits beside her. "Does it bother you, knowing that your husband isn't actually divine?" "You're divine enough," she says. "You maintain the system that keeps Egypt prosperous. You preserve knowledge that took centuries to accumulate. You give people reasons to believe in cosmic order. That's more divine than anything the gods themselves accomplish, since they mostly just sit in temples looking stern." He laughs despite his nervousness. "I don't think you're supposed to talk about gods that way. I'm the pharaoh's wife. I can talk about gods however I want." She takes his hand, bronze polish smearing onto her skin. "You'll do fine at the ceremony. The calculations are correct, the mirrors are positioned properly, and you're better at the performance than you think. People want to believe you're divine. You just have to not actively disappoint them." It's reassuring in a strange way, being reminded that the bar for successful divine kingship is don't actively disappoint people's expectations. He's been building it up in his mind as something impossible, but maybe it's just extremely difficult instead. They sit together in comfortable silence, surrounded by mirrors and astronomical charts and the accumulated tools of performing miracles. Outside, the city sleeps. Above, stars follow their predicted paths. The universe continues indifferent to human performance, which somehow makes the performance more important rather than less. The summer solstice arrives with weather that couldn't be better if the gods actually arranged it. Clear skies, gentle breeze, temperature perfect for standing in elaborate ceremonial robes without collapsing from heatstroke. The young pharaoh chooses to interpret this as good luck rather than divine favour, though he's aware most people will see it the opposite way. The crowd gathers even larger than it was for his grandfather's ceremonies. Word has spread throughout Egypt that the new pharaoh will perform his first major miracle. People want to see if divine authority really transfers from one ruler to the next. if the system actually works the way priests claim it does. Standing in the temple's inner sanctuary, surrounded by the mirrors, positioned with mathematical precision, the young pharaoh feels surprisingly calm. He's prepared for this. He knows the calculations. He understands the mechanisms. He's practiced the performance until the gestures feel natural. The old priest approaches, moving slowly but with dignity age hasn't entirely stolen. The time approaches, Divine One. Are you prepared? As prepared as anyone can be for commanding the sun. The priest smiles slightly. Your grandfather used to make similar jokes. It's a good sign. They take their positions. The mirrors gleam in the pre-dawn darkness, catching lamplight and throwing it back in soft, dancing patterns. Other priests arrange themselves throughout the sanctuary, each one knowing their role, their exact position, their precise moment to act if adjustments become necessary. The young pharaoh stands on the raised platform, facing the entrance where sunlight will soon appear. He raises his arms, assuming the posture his grandfather perfected, the one that makes you look like you're simultaneously commanding cosmic forces and welcoming them home. His shoulders are already starting to ache. His grandfather wasn't lying about that part. The darkness outside begins its slow fade from absolute black to something marginally less black. The crowd's anticipatory murmur drops to complete silence. Thousands of people holding their breath together creates an almost physical pressure. The horizon brightens. Red, then orange, then gold. The same progression the young pharaoh has watched countless times, but which now carries the weight of his entire political authority. If this doesn't work, if the calculations are wrong, if the mirrors fail to catch the light properly, his reign could be over before it truly begins. The first ray of sunlight appears. It enters the temple exactly where mathematical precision predicted it would. It travels down the main axis, illuminating columns in sequence, moving with the inevitability of physics toward the inner sanctuary, where the young pharaoh waits. The light hits the first mirror. For a heartbeat that feels like eternity, nothing happens. The young pharaoh thinks, this is where it all falls apart. This is where I discover that my grandfather's miracles were actually divine intervention, and I'm just a person pretending to command forces beyond human control. Then the light bounces, mirror to mirror to mirror, each reflection brighter and faster than the last. Light cascading through the sanctuary in a geometric pattern that looks like physics caught fire. The bronze surfaces blaze. The statue of Ra becomes a focal point of golden radiance that makes it nearly painful to look at directly. The crowd erupts. The sound is enormous, overwhelming. Thousands of voices creating a wave of sound that feels like it might physically knock you backward if you weren't braced for it. The young pharaoh holds his pose, arms raised, face serene. Inside, he's screaming with relief and exhilaration and the sudden understanding that he actually did it. He commanded the sun. He made people believe. He proved that divine authority transfers successfully from one generation to the next. The performance continues for exactly the duration the astronomers calculated would be optimal. Long enough to be impressive, short enough that the effect doesn't fade into familiarity. Then, with practiced grace, he lowers his arms in the gesture that says, the miracle is complete, cosmic order is maintained. You can all relax now. The priests move forward with offerings and prayers, performing their parts of the ceremony, while the young pharaoh catches his breath and tries to stop his hands from shaking with adrenaline. He did it. It actually worked. The system continues. Citamen catches his eye from her position among the royal family members. She's smiling, proud and amused in equal measure. Later, she'll probably tease him about how terrified he looked in that moment before the first mirror caught the light. But right now, she just looks happy. The remainder of the ceremony passes in a blur of ritual words and prescribed actions. The young pharaoh moves through them automatically, letting training and muscle memory carry him, while his mind processes what just happened. He performed a miracle. Or rather, he performed the performance of a miracle so well that the distinction stopped mattering. By the time he emerges from the temple into full daylight, the crowd has transformed from skeptical witnesses into fervent believers. They press forward, reaching out to touch his robes, calling out blessings and prayers and declarations of loyalty. Guards maintain a protective corridor, but barely. A woman breaks through the line, elderly and determined, clutching something in her gnarled hands. The guards tense, but the young pharaoh motions for them to let her approach. She holds out a small carved amulet, rough and clearly homemade. "My grandson made this," she says, voice shaking. "He died last month, before he could see you command the sun, but he believed. He knew the new pharaoh would maintain cosmic order. Please take it, so he knows he was right." The young pharaoh accepts the amulet carefully. It's warm from her hands, carved from common stone, worth nothing by any material measure. But it represents faith, not in gods, but in the system he now maintains, in the continuity of divine authority, in the promise that cosmic order persists despite individual deaths. "Your grandson was right," he says gently. "His faith honours both of us." The woman's face crumbles with relief and grief and something that might be joy. She bows deeply and retreats back into the crowd, and then the young pharaoh continues his procession, holding a carved stone that will probably end up in some palace storeroom, but which feels, in this moment, more important than gold. Back at the palace alone, finally after hours of ceremony and celebration and performative divinity, he sits in his private chamber holding the amulet. The stone is cool now, no longer carrying the warmth of the old woman's desperate faith. But he can still feel what it represents, the enormous weight of belief that millions of people have placed on his shoulders. His grandfather carried this weight for decades. Now it's his turn. The calculations and mirrors and astronomical knowledge make the miracle possible. But this belief, this faith, this desperate human need for cosmic order, this is what makes it necessary. He sets the amulet on a shelf where he'll see it every day, a reminder that divine kingship isn't about him. It's about everyone who needs to believe that someone is maintaining the Mayat, keeping chaos at bay, ensuring that the sun returns each morning. That's a burden worth carrying even if the crown is heavy and the performance never ends. Historical fact time. Archaeological evidence suggests that Egyptian pharaohs received offerings and tokens from common people regularly in untold, though most of these simple items degraded over time while gold and precious materials survived. Tomb paintings and reliefs show pharaohs accepting gifts from subjects of all social classes, suggesting that accessibility, or at least the appearance of accessibility, was considered important for maintaining political stability. The divine pharaoh needed to seem simultaneously superhuman and human enough to care about individual subjects. The years that follow establish the young pharaoh's reign as legitimate and prosperous. He continues his grandfather's building projects while initiating new ones, each temple and monument incorporating astronomical alignments with increasing sophistication. The knowledge tradition continues, astronomers making new observations, architects discovering new techniques, the entire system of divine performance growing more elaborate with each generation. But he also introduces subtle changes. He holds public audiences more frequently, allowing common people to present petitions directly, rather than filtering everything through administrative layers. He explains his decisions in terms people can understand, translating political necessity into accessible language. Some of the older advisors worry that he's demystifying the pharaonic authority, making himself too human and accessible. But the young pharaoh has learned something his grandfather understood instinctively. People need both distance and proximity. They need to believe their ruler is divine, but they also need to believe that divinity cares about them personally. It's a balancing act, like everything else about being pharaoh. Too distant and you seem like an uncaring abstraction. Too familiar, and you lose the mystique that makes people accept your authority. The key is calibrating the performance to maintain both qualities simultaneously. One morning, a foreign delegation arrives from the Hittite territories to the north. They've heard stories about the Egyptian pharaoh who commands the sun and want to witness this miracle for themselves. Their skepticism is barely concealed beneath diplomatic courtesy. The young pharaoh receives them in the throne room, sitting in a chair designed to make him look larger and more imposing than he actually is. Another piece of stagecraft, as essential to divine authority as mirror alignments and astronomical calculations. The Hittite ambassador is a hard-faced man who looks like he's spent his life in military campaigns. He presents gifts and diplomatic pleasantries, but his eyes are calculating, assessing, looking for weaknesses to exploit. "We have heard remarkable stories about Egyptian divine authority," the ambassador says carefully. "Stories that seem difficult to believe." Truth often seems difficult to believe until witnessed directly, the young pharaoh responds. You are welcome to attend the next solstice ceremony and judge for yourself whether Egypt's pharaoh commands cosmic forces. We look forward to it. The ambassador's smile doesn't reach his eyes. In our lands, kings are chosen for their strength and military success. We find the Egyptian claim of divine kingship intriguing. It's a challenge wrapped in diplomatic language. The subtext is clear. Military strength matters more than religious theatre. The Hittites are testing whether this young pharaoh will fold under pressure or defend his authority. Military strength wins battles, the young pharaoh says evenly. Divine authority maintains civilizations. Egypt has endured for thousands of years not through constant warfare but through cosmic order. Our system outlasts individual kings and kingdoms because it's built on something more permanent than the success of any single campaign. The ambassador's expression shifts slightly. He wasn't expecting philosophical pushback. Most young rulers feel compelled to prove their military strength when challenged. This pharaoh is defending a completely different kind of power. They continue the diplomatic dance for hours, probing and deflecting, establishing terms of trade and tentative peace agreements. The Hittites will stay for several weeks, observing Egyptian governance and waiting for the next ceremonial demonstration of divine authority. Which means the pressure is on again, not just to perform the miracle successfully, but to perform it in a way that impresses foreign skeptics who have no cultural investment in believing Egyptian religious claims. That evening, the young pharaoh meets with his senior priests and astronomers to plan the demonstration. They gather in the observation chamber where so many previous discussions about performing divinity have taken place. The Hittites are trained observers, one astronomer points out. Military commanders learn to assess situations accurately. They'll be looking for tricks, for mechanisms, for anything that undermines the claim of divine authority. So we show them the mechanisms, the young pharaoh says. The room goes silent. Several priests look genuinely shocked. Divine one, the old priest says carefully. Surely you don't mean to reveal the astronomical calculations and mirror positions. I mean to show them that understanding how the universe works is its own form of divine authority. The Hittites respect strength and knowledge. We'll demonstrate both. Show them the centuries of observations, the mathematical precision, the architectural genius required to align temples with celestial events. Make them understand that Egyptian divine authority is based on genuine mastery of cosmic patterns, not just theatrical tricks. It's a radical departure from traditional practice. Previous pharaohs maintained mystery, never explaining how miracles worked. But the young pharaoh is betting that in this specific situation, with this specific audience, transparency will be more impressive than mystery. It's risky, one advisor says. If they see the mechanisms, they might dismiss the miracle. Or they might be so impressed by our knowledge that they can't dismiss it. Either way, we establish that Egyptian authority is based on something real and lasting. That's more valuable than maintaining a mystery they'll eventually figure out anyway. The decision is made. For the next several weeks, Egyptian priests and astronomers give the Hittite delegation an education in celestial mechanics, astronomical observation, and mathematical calculation. They show the centuries of accumulated data, the careful tracking of stellar positions, the discovery of patterns that allow prediction of celestial events. The Hittites are initially skeptical, then intrigued, then genuinely impressed. Their military training taught them to respect genuine expertise, and what the Egyptians are showing them is the expertise built over generations, knowledge accumulated through patient observation and mathematical rigor. By the time the solstice ceremony arrives, the Hittite delegation has transformed from skeptical challengers into fascinated students. They understand the mechanisms now, know how the mirrors work and why the alignments matter. But rather than diminishing the miracle, this understanding enhances it. When the sun rises and light cascades through the temple exactly as predicted, exactly as the Egyptians explained it would, the Hittites don't see theatre. They see mastery. They see a civilization that understands cosmic forces well enough to predict and demonstrate them with perfect precision. The ambassador approaches the young pharaoh after the ceremony, his hard face showing something that might be respect. We came expecting religious deception, he admits. What we found was genuine knowledge. The Hittite king will hear that Egyptian divine authority is based on understanding that we cannot match. That's more intimidating than any military demonstration. It's a diplomatic victory, more significant than it might appear. Word will spread through neighbouring kingdoms that Egypt's power isn't just military or economic, but intellectual and technical. That reputation will deter some conflicts and create opportunities for favourable trade agreements. All because the young pharaoh chose transparency over mystery, knowledge over secrecy, confident that what Egypt actually knows is more impressive than any fiction they could maintain. His grandfather might have handled it differently, maintaining the mystery and relying on the impression of impossible divine power. But this approach works too, maybe better for this specific situation. There isn't one correct way to perform divine kingship. Each pharaoh has to calibrate the performance to match their personality and their circumstances. That's the secret his grandfather tried to teach him in those final conversations. Divine authority isn't a script to follow exactly. It's a framework that each generation adapts while maintaining its essential purpose, giving people reasons to believe in cosmic order and accepting pharaonic authority as the human embodiment of that order. Fringe fact time, there is some evidence that ancient civilizations exchanged technical knowledge more than traditionally assumed. Egyptian astronomical and mathematical texts found their way into Greek and later Arab scholarship. Hittite metallurgy influenced Egyptian bronze working. The ancient world wasn't as isolated as older historical models suggested. Knowledge travelled, sometimes through conquest, more often through trade and diplomatic exchange. The young pharaoh's decision to share astronomical knowledge with the Hittites might seem radical, but it fit patterns of technical exchange that occurred throughout the ancient Mediterranean and Near East. The sharing of knowledge with the Hittites creates unexpected consequences. Over the following years, foreign scholars begin arriving in Egypt seeking to study with the priest astronomers who maintain the observational tradition. Some come from neighbouring kingdoms, others travel from distant lands the young pharaoh has barely heard of. This influx of foreign students creates a de facto academy, a place where astronomical and mathematical knowledge is taught systematically, rather than passed down only within priestly families. The young pharaoh encourages this development, seeing it as a way to enhance Egypt's reputation and influence. His advisors are divided. Some see the academy as a brilliant extension of Egyptian soft power, creating dependency as foreign kingdoms realize they lack Egypt's technical sophistication. Others worry that sharing knowledge will eventually diminish Egypt's advantage. Knowledge isn't depleted by sharing, the young pharaoh argues during one contentious council meeting. If anything, teaching forces us to codify and systematize what we know, which often reveals gaps in our own understanding, the foreign stolkombims. Students aren't taking our knowledge away, they're helping us refine it. It's a radical position for the time, based on assumptions about knowledge and education that won't become common for centuries. But the young pharaoh has advantages his grandfather didn't. He grew up knowing the mechanisms behind divine authority, never had to discover that truth himself. That early knowledge shaped how he thinks about information and power. The academy grows. Buildings are constructed specifically for astronomical observation and mathematical instruction. Libraries are established to house the accumulated charts and calculations. What began as informal teaching becomes a structured institution that will influence intellectual development throughout the ancient world. Foreign students bring their own observations and techniques, creating a cross-pollination of ideas that accelerates discovery. A Nubian student notices patterns in Nile flooding that Egyptian astronomers hadn't connected to celestial events. A scholar from the Levant introduces new mathematical techniques for calculating angles. A trader from the Mediterranean coast describes navigational methods based on stellar positions. The knowledge tradition that began as carefully guarded priestly secret becomes increasingly collaborative and cosmopolitan. The young pharaoh watches this transformation with satisfaction, understanding that he's accidentally created something that will outlast his reign, and possibly the Egyptian civilization itself. Not that Egypt shows any signs of decline. The prosperity continues, harvests remain abundant, trade flourishes. The divine authority system still works, still provides political stability and social cohesion, but now it's supplemented by reputation as an intellectual centre, a place where people come to learn how the universe works. Sitaman asks him one evening whether he's worried about diminishing the mystery of divine kingship by spreading the knowledge so widely. "I'm trading one kind of authority for another," he explains. The mystery-based authority that Grandfather perfected works until someone figures out the mechanisms. The knowledge-based authority I'm building works better the more people understand it. Instead of the Pharaoh has impossible divine powers, we're moving toward the Pharaoh commands knowledge and wisdom that took centuries to accumulate. Both claim divine authority, but the second version is more honest and probably more durable. More honest? She raises an eyebrow. You're still claiming to command the sun. I command the intellectual tradition that allows prediction of solar movements. That's semantics, not decision. She laughs. You've become very good at justifying the performance while knowing it's a performance. That's what pharaohs do. They're sitting on the palace roof watching sunset paint the sky in colours that follow patterns the astronomers have long since decoded. Knowing why the sky turns red at sunset doesn't make it less beautiful. If anything, understanding the mechanism enhances appreciation of the effect. This is what the young pharaoh is discovering about divine kingship in his particular era. The old mystery-based model worked when people had no framework for understanding how things worked. But as knowledge spreads, as more people gain access to education and technical understanding, the divine claims need to evolve. They need to be based on actual mastery rather than cultivated ignorance. He's not sure his grandfather would approve of this approach. The old pharaoh valued mystery, believed that some gap between ruler and ruled was essential for maintaining authority. But times change, knowledge spreads. The performance must evolve to match new conditions while maintaining its essential purpose. Years pass. The academy grows more influential. The young pharaoh is no longer quite so young, approaching middle age, more comfortable in his authority. He's performed the solstice ceremony dozens of times now, perfected the gestures and timing until they're second nature. The crowd still erupts in awe each time. The system still works. But he's aware that he's presiding over a transition, a shift in how divine authority operates. Future pharaohs will inherit both his grandfather's mirror-based demonstrations and his own knowledge-sharing academy. They'll have to calibrate the performance to balance both elements, mystery and explanation, divine claim and intellectual achievement. That's fine. Each generation has to figure out how to maintain at cosmic order using whatever tools and techniques work for their specific circumstances. There's no single correct way to be pharaoh, just a set of principles that must be maintained while methods evolve. One afternoon, an old man arrives at the palace requesting audience. He's introduced as a former student of the academy, Egyptian by birth, who spent decades travelling to distant lands and has now returned with observations and techniques from places Egypt has barely heard of. The young pharaoh receives him in a private chamber rather than the formal throne room. Something about the old traveller suggests that this conversation will be more interesting, conducted informally. I've been to lands beyond the eastern mountains, the old man says, spreading maps and charts across a table. Places where they've developed astronomical observations independent of Egyptian knowledge. Their methods are different, sometimes more sophisticated in certain areas. I've brought back what I learned. He describes civilizations that track planets with remarkable precision, that have discovered mathematical relationships between celestial movements, that have developed calendar systems based on observations matching Egyptian accuracy, despite having no contact with Egyptian astronomy. What I learned, the old man says slowly, is that the universe reveals its patterns to anyone patient enough to observe carefully. The knowledge Egypt has accumulated isn't unique divine revelation. It's human achievement that others have also accomplished through similar dedication. It's a challenging statement, potentially undermining the divine kingship claims. But the young pharaoh doesn't feel threatened. That's actually reassuring, he says. It means our knowledge is real, verifiable, not dependent on anyone's faith or belief. Multiple civilizations discovering the same patterns independently confirms that we're learning truth rather than inventing comfortable fictions. The old traveller looks surprised. Most rulers would find that threatening. Most rulers claim divine authority based on mystery and revelation. I claim divine authority based on accumulated knowledge and intellectual achievement. Learning that other civilizations have achieved similar knowledge doesn't diminish Egyptian authority. It confirms that what we've discovered is actually true. They spend hours discussing the old man's travels, comparing astronomical observations from different civilizations, discovering areas where Egyptian knowledge is more advanced, and areas where other cultures have made progress Egypt hasn't matched. It's humbling and exciting simultaneously, realizing that Egyptian astronomy is impressive but not unique, that humans everywhere look up at the same sky and slowly decode its patterns through patience and mathematics. This conversation will influence the young pharaoh's approach to divine authority for the rest of his reign. He stops claiming exclusive divine revelation and starts emphasizing Egyptian mastery of knowledge available to anyone dedicated enough to pursue it. It's a subtle shift, but one that makes the divine claims more defensible because they're based on achievement rather than mystical exception. Historical fact time. Evidence suggests more contact and knowledge exchange between ancient civilizations than often assumed. Astronomical observations from Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica show independent discovery of similar patterns and relationships. While these civilizations developed unique cultural interpretations, the underlying astronomical knowledge often converged because they were all observing the same universe. This suggests that empirical observation, patient record-keeping, and mathematical analysis lead reliably toward truth, regardless of cultural context. That's a profound insight that wouldn't be formally articulated until the scientific revolution. But ancient astronomers understood it practically. The young pharaoh, though he's not so young anymore, into his 40s now, with the first hints of grey in his hair that cosmetics can't entirely hide, stands before a new challenge. The Nile's flood was weak this year. Not catastrophically so, but noticeably below normal. The priests have presented their observations, compared water levels to decades of careful records, and the conclusion is unavoidable. Crops will be stressed, harvests reduced, food stores depleted. In previous eras, a weak flood might have been interpreted as divine disfavour, as evidence that the pharaoh had somehow failed to maintain Mahat. But the young pharaoh has spent decades building a different framework, one where natural events are explained through observable patterns rather than divine caprice. He convenes an emergency council that includes not just priests and advisors, but also irrigation engineers, agricultural specialists, and grain administrators. If divine authority can't make the river rise, practical management will have to compensate. The flood follows patterns, he tells the assembled experts. Patterns we haven't fully decoded yet. But we don't need divine intervention. We need intelligent resource management. They develop a comprehensive plan. Grain reserves will be distributed from central stores to regions facing shortages. Irrigation systems will be modified to use available water more efficiently. Tax burdens will be reduced in the most affected areas. Labour will be redirected from monument construction to agricultural support. It's unglamorous work, nothing like commanding the sun, but it's the real work of maintaining cosmic order, not through miraculous intervention, but through competent administration based on accumulated knowledge about agriculture, hydrology, and economics. The weak flood year becomes a demonstration of a different kind of divine authority. The pharaoh can't control the Nile, but he can control Egypt's response to natural variation. That turns out to be more impressive to most people than theatrical miracles. They see that their god-king ensures they don't starve even when the river doesn't cooperate. That's practical divinity. Historical fact time. The Nile's flood varied significantly from year to year, following patterns related to rainfall in Ethiopian highlands thousands of miles away. Ancient Egyptians couldn't control these variations, but they developed sophisticated systems for managing the consequences. Joseph's biblical story about 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine reflects Egyptian practices of grain storage and resource management during flood variation cycles. The ability to manage natural variation was genuinely impressive given the limited tools available. The weak flood year passes, the next year's flood is average, and the year after that is abundant. The young pharaoh's management during the difficult year earns lasting loyalty. People remember who kept them fed when nature didn't cooperate. But the experience shapes his thinking about divine kingship. He realizes that the solstice ceremonies and astronomical demonstrations, while important, are actually secondary to the unglamorous work of competent governance. The theatrical miracles maintain belief, but the practical administration maintains civilization. He starts to shift resources and attention accordingly. Monument construction continues, but at a slower pace. More resources go into irrigation infrastructure, grain storage facilities, administrative systems that allow rapid response to problems. The divine authority claim remains intact, but it's increasingly backed by practical achievement rather than just astronomical theatre. This doesn't sit well with all the priests. Some argue that he's diminishing the sacred nature of pharaonic authority, making it too mundane and administrative. They worry that future generations will question divine kingship if it's too obviously connected to practical governance rather than mysterious cosmic forces. The old priest, now ancient and increasingly frail, calls him to a private meeting. They sit in the observation chamber that has hosted so many important conversations across the decades. "You're changing things," the old priest observes, "moving away from the model your grandfather perfected." The world changes. The performance must change to match. But you risk undermining the essential mystery. If people see divine kingship as just extremely competent governance, then they'll support it based on results rather than faith. That's more stable long-term. The old priest is quiet for a long moment. When he speaks again, his voice carries the weight of decades of experience maintaining the divine kingship system. Your grandfather understood something you're forgetting. Most people don't want to understand how things work. They want magic. They want memorfum mystery. They want to believe that someone has powers beyond normal human capacity. Give them competent administration and they'll appreciate it, but they won't worship you for it. The theatrical miracles aren't just show, they're the foundation of political stability. But they're based on knowledge that's spreading. We can't maintain mystery when we're running an academy that teaches astronomical observation to anyone dedicated enough to learn. Then perhaps the academy was a mistake. It's a fundamental disagreement about the direction of Egyptian civilization. The old priest represents traditional practice, the carefully maintained mystery that made divine kingship work for millennia. The young pharaoh represents a new approach, betting that knowledge-based authority is more sustainable than mystery-based authority as education spreads. "I respect your perspective," the young pharaoh says carefully. "I can't go back to pure mystery now. We've already opened that door. The question isn't whether to maintain secrecy, but how to structure divine authority in a world where more people understand the mechanisms." The old priest sighs. "You may be right. Or you may be presiding over the gradual dissolution of a system that has maintained Egyptian stability for thousands of years. We won't know until long after we're both dead." It's an unsatisfying conclusion, but an honest one. The young pharaoh is making choices whose consequences won't be fully apparent for generations. That's the burden of leadership, making decisions with incomplete information about long-term effects. The old priest dies the following year, peacefully in his sleep at an age that seems impossible. His funeral is elaborate, befitting someone who maintained the astronomical observations for over 6 decades. The young pharaoh delivers the eulogy personally, honouring the old man's dedication to preserving knowledge, while acknowledging their disagreement about how that knowledge should be used. A new high priest is appointed, younger, more aligned with the pharaoh's knowledge-sharing approach. The transition marks a generational shift in how the priestly establishment thinks about divine authority and astronomical knowledge. The academy continues to grow. Foreign students now outnumber Egyptian students in some classes. Knowledge is being codified in texts that will eventually be translated into other languages, spreading Egyptian astronomical and mathematical insights throughout the ancient world. The young pharaoh, now approaching 50, sits in the same spot where he watched sunsets with Sitamun decades ago. She's beside him still, older and comfortable. Their early passion matured into deep partnership. "Do you think we made the right choices?" he asks. "About what specifically?" "We've made thousands of choices. About opening the knowledge. About moving away from pure mystery. About changing how divine kingship works." She considers this seriously. "I think you did what made sense for your personality and your circumstances. Your grandfather's approach worked for it. Yours works for you. Future pharaohs will figure out what works for them. That's how systems survive, by adapting to changing conditions while maintaining core purposes. And the core purpose is giving people reasons to believe in cosmic order. To believe that someone is maintaining Mayat, keeping chaos at bay. Whether you do that through theatrical miracles or competent administration or accumulated knowledge doesn't matter as long as the essential purpose is fulfilled." It's a wise answer, probably the best available for questions without definitive solutions. The young pharaoh takes her hand, skin warm and familiar, More real than crowns or divine claims or any amount of accumulated authority. They sit together watching the sun set, following patterns decoded long ago, beautiful despite being understood. The performance continues, the knowledge grows, Egypt prospers. That's enough. The young pharaoh's reign continues into old age. He performs the solstice ceremony annually, each time aware that he's maintaining a tradition that has evolved significantly from his grandfather's era. The mirrors still flash. The light still converges. The crowd still erupts in awe, but the meaning has shifted, subtly, from mysterious divine intervention towards celebrated intellectual achievement. His children, now adults, are being prepared for eventual succession. He takes his eldest son to the observation chamber, shows him the same charts and calculations that were shown to him, teaches the same double curriculum of practical knowledge and theatrical performance. But the world his son will inherit is different from the world he inherited. Knowledge is more widely distributed. Foreign civilizations are more aware of Egyptian techniques. The divine kingship claims face more sophisticated skepticism. How do I maintain authority, his son asks, when anyone with patience and mathematical training can learn the same astronomical patterns we use to demonstrate divine power? By being better at it than anyone else. By maintaining observational programs that span centuries. By building on accumulated knowledge faster than others can replicate it. And by remembering that the astronomical demonstrations are tools, not the foundation. The foundation is competent governance that keeps people prosperous and secure. They are developing a new model of divine kingship for a more educated era. One where the pharaoh is revered not as mysteriously powerful but as supremely knowledgeable, as the embodiment of centuries of accumulated wisdom. It's still divine authority, but with divinity redefined as mastery rather than mystery. Historical fact time. The concept of divine kingship eventually did decline, though not for many centuries after this period. As education spread and knowledge became more democratized, claims of unique divine authority became harder to maintain. But the transition wasn't sudden or revolutionary. It was gradual, with each generation slightly redefining what divine authority meant until eventually political legitimacy came to be based on different foundations entirely. The astronomical and mathematical knowledge that supported ancient divine kingship claims eventually became the foundation of empirical science, suggesting that the knowledge was always more real than the divine claims built upon it. The pharaoh's health begins declining in his 60s. Nothing dramatic but steady erosion that age brings. He continues performing public duties, but with increasing difficulty. His son takes on more responsibilities, easing into the role he'll formally assume after his father's death. One last solstice ceremony. The pharaoh, now old and tired but still commanding, stands in the temple where he's performed this miracle dozens of times. His body aches. His vision isn't quite what it was, but the gestures are automatic now, perfected across decades. The sun rises, the light enters, the mirrors catch and throw and amplify. The statue of Ra blazes with reflected radiance. The crowd erupts with the same enthusiasm they showed at his first ceremony decades ago, and standing there, arms raised toward a statue that looks alive with light, the old pharaoh realizes something that his grandfather probably understood long ago. It doesn't matter whether the divinity is real. What matters is that the system works, that people believe in cosmic order, that civilization continues functioning. He's maintained Mayat, not through literal divine power, but through accumulated knowledge, competent governance, and dedicated performance of a role larger than himself. That's divinity enough. The ceremony concludes. He descends from the platform on legs that barely support him, but no one sees the weakness. They see their pharaoh, still commanding the sun after decades of rule, still maintaining the cosmic order that keeps their world making sense. That evening, surrounded by family in the private chambers, the old pharaoh allows himself to drop the performance. He's tired, so very tired. The weight of maintaining divine authority for decades has taken its toll. His son sits beside him, holding his hand like he did when he was a child. "Thank you," the son says simply, "for teaching me both things, the knowledge and the performance, the truth and the useful fiction." "They are not as separate as you think," the old pharaoh says. "The truth is that we understand the universe through patient observation. The useful fiction is that this understanding makes us divine, but maybe knowledge is a form of divinity. Maybe mastering cosmic patterns is as divine as humans can get." It's as close to a final wisdom as he can articulate. The knowledge is real. The divinity is performed, but the performance based on genuine knowledge creates something that transcends both. A civilization that thrives because people believe in order maintained by someone who actually possesses the knowledge to maintain it. The old pharaoh dies peacefully several months later, surrounded by family, honoured by his people, secure in the knowledge that the system continues. His son becomes pharaoh, inheriting both the astronomical charts and the weight of performance, both the accumulated knowledge and the burden of maintaining divine authority in an increasingly sophisticated world. The funeral procession stretches for miles. Common people and foreign dignitaries alike come to witness the transition, to see one god-king laid to rest and another assume the throne. The ceremonies are elaborate, tested across millennia, each gesture carrying layers of meaning that most participants understand only partially. The new pharaoh, we should call him that now, distinct from his father though carrying forward the same traditions, performs the funeral rites with precision that honours both training and genuine grief. He speaks the words that send his father to join Ra's eternal journey. He makes the offerings that maintain cosmic balance. He accepts the crown that transforms him from prince into living god. And inside, beneath the performance, he's aware of the enormous machinery he's now responsible for maintaining. The temples align to celestial events, the priest astronomers tracking stellar positions night after night, the academy teaching foreign students the mathematical precision that makes Egyptian miracles possible, the grain storage systems and irrigation networks and trade agreements that actually keep Egypt prosperous while everyone focuses on the theatrical demonstrations of divine power. It's overwhelming. But his father prepared him well. He knows how the mirrors work. He understands the astronomical calculations. He's studied the history of how divine kingship evolved from his great-grandfather's mystery-based model through his father's knowledge-sharing approach. He's ready, as much as anyone can be ready to claim authority over cosmic forces they don't actually control. The first test comes quickly. A rival kingdom to the east, sensing potential weakness during the transition, sends an army to test Egypt's borders. It's not a full invasion, more of a probing raid to see whether the new pharaoh can respond effectively. The new pharaoh convenes his military advisors quickly. They present options ranging from full military response to diplomatic negotiation. He listens carefully, aware that his first major decision will shape how other kingdoms perceive his reign. We respond with overwhelming force, he decides, but we follow military action with diplomatic outreach. Show them that Egyptian strength is backed by both military capacity and intellectual sophistication. Defeat them in battle, then offer them favourable trade terms and invitation to send students to the academy. It's his father's approach, combining traditional power projection with the newer emphasis on knowledge sharing and cultural influence. The military campaign is brief and decisive. Egyptian forces, well trained and well equipped, drive back the invaders with minimal Egyptian casualties. But then, instead of demanding harsh tribute or establishing permanent occupation, the new pharaoh sends diplomats offering peace terms that are surprisingly generous. Trade agreements, cultural exchange, or opportunity for scholars from the defeated kingdom to study at the Egyptian academy. It's confusing to the rival kingdom's leaders. They expected punishment, not partnership, but they're also practical enough to recognise opportunity. Within a year, trade is flourishing between the two kingdoms, and students from the East are learning Egyptian astronomical techniques, historical fact time. Ancient Egyptian foreign policy varied considerably between periods of strong centralised rule and periods of weakness. During the New Kingdom, Egypt often combined military dominance with diplomatic sophistication, creating vassal states through treaties that offered benefits along with obligations. The archaeological record shows extensive trade networks and cultural exchange even between kingdoms that occasionally fought each other. Ancient geopolitics was complex, not simply cycles of conquest and domination. The new pharaoh's approach to foreign policy reflects his father's influence, using knowledge and cultural prestige as tools of influence alongside a traditional military strength. It's effective but requires maintaining Egypt's intellectual edge, which means continuing the observational programs and mathematical research that make Egyptian astronomy the most advanced in the known world. He dedicates more resources to the academy, expanding facilities and recruiting the best scholars regardless of their origin. Egyptians, Nubians, Levantines, even students from distant lands whose names he can barely pronounce. They all gather in purpose-built buildings to study how the universe works. The Academy becomes famous throughout the ancient world. To study there becomes a mark of distinction, a credential that opens doors in courts and temples from the Mediterranean to Mesopotamia. Knowledge is power, but knowledge plus Egyptian endorsement is even more powerful. Years pass. The new pharaoh settles into his role, developing his own style that differs from his father's, just as his father's differed from the great-grandfather who first perfected the mirror-based solstice ceremony. Each generation adapts the performance while maintaining its essential purpose. He performs the solstice ceremony annually, and each time it works perfectly because the calculations are precise and the mirrors are positioned correctly, and the universe follows reliable patterns. The crowd always erupts in awe, the belief never wavers, the system continues. But he's also aware that the world is changing. More kingdoms are developing their own astronomical observational programs, learning techniques that were once exclusively Egyptian. The knowledge monopoly is eroding naturally as education spreads and cultures exchange information. This doesn't threaten Egyptian authority as much as previous generations might have feared, because by the time other kingdoms develop similar knowledge, Egypt has already established itself as the intellectual centre, the place where the most advanced research happens, where the best scholars gather, where the most sophisticated techniques are developed. It's like being the best university in a world that's slowly figuring out that universities matter. Others can develop similar institutions, but Egypt has a head start measured in centuries, an accumulated advantage that's difficult to overcome. Fringe fact time. Some controversial scholars argue that ancient knowledge centres like the Potential Academy at Alexandria or earlier Egyptian institutions may have achieved intellectual sophistication that wasn't matched again until much later. The loss of the Library of Alexandria and other ancient repositories makes it difficult to assess exactly how advanced ancient scholarship became. But the sophistication of surviving astronomical texts and mathematical papyri suggests that ancient scholars understood principles that later civilizations had to rediscover. The continuity of knowledge isn't linear. Sometimes it advances, sometimes it retreats, sometimes it gets lost and rediscovered centuries later. The new pharaoh receives a visitor from a distant eastern land, who describes astronomical observations that challenge Egyptian assumptions. This foreign scholar has tracked planetary movements with precision matching Egyptian techniques, and he's discovered patterns that Egyptian astronomers haven't noticed. Rather than feeling threatened, the pharaoh is excited. He invites the foreign scholar to present his findings to the academy, to engage in discussion and debate with Egyptian astronomers. The resulting exchange is productive. Both sides learn from each other, refining their understanding through collaborative investigation. This becomes a model for how the pharaoh handles intellectual challenge. Instead of defending Egyptian knowledge as divinely revealed and therefore unchallengeable, he encourages critical examination and comparative analysis. The result is faster intellectual progress and enhanced reputation for Egyptian open-mindedness. Some of the more traditional priests worry that this approach undermines the divine kingship claims. If Egyptian knowledge is just human achievement that others can match or exceed, what makes the pharaoh divine? The pharaoh addresses this concern in a meeting with his senior priests and advisors. They gather in the observation chamber, surrounded by charts representing centuries of accumulated data. Divine authority doesn't come from knowing things others don't know, he explains. It comes from being the focal point of a system that consistently produces true knowledge about the universe. We maintain the observational programs, we preserve the records, we train the scholars, we create the environment where intellectual progress happens. That's the real miracle, not individual insights, but the systematic pursuit of understanding across generations. It's a sophisticated argument that redefines divinity itself, not as possession of impossible powers, but as stewardship of knowledge-producing systems. Some priests accept this readily. Others remain uncomfortable with the shift away from more mystical conceptions of divine authority. But the pharaoh's approach is working in practical terms. Egypt remains prosperous. Foreign kingdoms seek Egyptian alliance and friendship. The academy attracts the best minds from throughout the known world. Trade flourishes. The system functions. That's the real measure of successful divine kingship. Not whether the theological claims are literally true, but whether the system built on those claims produces prosperity, stability, and progress. The pharaoh marries, has children, begins training them in the same double curriculum of practical knowledge and theatrical performance. His eldest daughter shows particular aptitude for astronomical observation, staying up late to track stellar positions with precision that impresses the senior astronomers. Could a woman be pharaoh? She asks from an evening, aware of the precedent set by previous female rulers, but also aware that most pharaohs have been male. If you can maintain Ma'at, he tells her, if you can command the respect necessary to hold the system together, then yes, gender matters less than capability. The crown is heavy for everyone who wears it. She nods, studying charts with intense focus. Whether she'll eventually rule or support her brother's rule isn't clear yet, but she's learning the essential knowledge either way, becoming part of the intellectual tradition that maintains Egyptian divine authority. Years accumulate. The pharaoh ages from young ruler to experienced administrator to senior statesman. His hair goes grey, then white, his joints ache on cold mornings. His vision requires compensation through carefully designed lighting and text size. But he's still commanding the sun each solstice, still maintaining the performance that justifies divine authority, still overseeing the knowledge systems that make Egypt the intellectual centre of the ancient world. One evening, sitting with his wife in the same spot where his father sat with his mother decades earlier, he reflects on what he's accomplished and what he's failed to achieve. I wonder, he says slowly, whether we're building something that will last, or just presiding over a gradual transition towards something completely different. His wife, practical as always, responds with characteristic directness. Both, probably. Everything that lasts also changes. The question isn't whether Egyptian civilization will transform, but whether the transformation maintains the essential purposes: prosperity, stability, knowledge preservation, cosmic order. And you think we're doing that? I think you're doing the best anyone could do with the circumstances you inherited and the challenges you've faced. That's all any pharaoh can achieve. The rest is beyond individual control. It's a comforting answer, one that acknowledges both human agency and human limitation. The pharaoh takes her hand, grateful for partnership that has sustained him through decades of performing divinity while knowing the mechanisms behind the performance. The stars emerge as darkness deepens, each one following predicted paths that have been mapped and calculated and understood, no less mysterious for being comprehensible, no less beautiful for being explained. That's the paradox at the heart of this entire system. Understanding doesn't diminish wonder if you approach it correctly. Knowledge and awe can coexist. Scientific precision and religious meaning can reinforce each other, rather than conflicting. Maybe that's the real legacy his family has been building across generations. Not just astronomical observations, or architectural achievements or successful divine kingship performances, but a framework for holding multiple truths simultaneously. The pharaoh is divine and human. The miracles are real and staged. The knowledge is empirical and sacred. All of it true at once, depending on perspective and purpose. The pharaoh's later years bring unexpected challenges. A series of poor flood years strain Egypt's resources, despite sophisticated management systems. Foreign kingdoms grow more powerful, developing military and economic capabilities that challenge Egyptian dominance. The Academy faces criticism from traditionalists who argue that sharing knowledge weakens Egyptian advantage. But these challenges also reveal the strength of the system that has been built across generations. The knowledge infrastructure allows rapid response to agricultural problems. The diplomatic relationships established through cultural exchange prevent conflicts that might otherwise have escalated to war. The intellectual reputation makes Egypt valuable as partner even to kingdoms that could potentially challenge it militarily. The pharaoh navigates these challenges with accumulated wisdom from decades of rule. He's not as vigorous as he was in youth, but he's more experienced, better at reading situations and people, more effective at finding solutions that balance competing interests. His children, now adults involved in governance, provide support and fresh perspectives. They are better educated than any previous generation, having grown up with full access to the Academy and its international community of scholars. They think differently about power and knowledge and authority than their ancestors did. The eldest son, now being groomed for succession, approaches divine kingship with casual confidence that would have been impossible in earlier generations. He knows the mechanisms so thoroughly that performing them seems natural rather than fraudulent. He's never experienced the crisis of discovering that divine claims are based on human knowledge rather than cosmic intervention, because he's known that truth his entire life. This generational shift represents something significant: the crisis of faith that the great-grandfather experienced, the careful balance the father maintained, the knowledge sharing the current pharaoh pioneered. All of that has created a new kind of ruler who performs divinity without internal conflict, because divinity has been redefined as mastery rather than mystery. Whether this is progress or decay won't be clear for generations, but it's definitely transformation. The system evolving to match changing conditions while attempting to maintain core purposes. Historical fact time: major civilizations often experience gradual transformations where institutions and belief systems evolve significantly over centuries while maintaining surface continuity. Roman religion transformed from traditional paganism to state-sponsored Christianity while retaining much of its institutional structure. Chinese political philosophy evolved dramatically from Confucianism to legalism to Neo-Confucianism, while maintaining the concept of heavenly mandate for rulers. Egyptian divine kingship likely underwent similar evolutionary changes across its 3,000-year history, adapting to new conditions while preserving essential forms. The pharaoh's health declines more noticeably in his 70s. He continues performing public duties but delegates increasing responsibilities to his children. The transition of authority is gradual, managed carefully to maintain stability and continuity. One last solstice ceremony. The old pharaoh, now frail but still commanding in ceremonial robes designed to hide physical weakness, performs the ritual one final time. His hands shake slightly as he raises his arms. His voice wavers during the ceremonial pronouncements. But the mirrors work perfectly. The light converges with blazing intensity, and the crowd erupts in their familiar mixture of awe and relief. Standing there, arms raised toward a statue blazing with reflected sunlight, the old pharaoh thinks about his great-grandfather who first perfected this performance, his father who modified it, himself who transformed it further, and his children who will continue evolving it in ways he can't predict. The knowledge continues. The performance continues. Egypt continues. That's the real miracle. Not individual achievements, but the system's ability to persist and adapt across generations. The ceremony concludes. He descends carefully, accepting support from his son, who will soon stand in this same position, performing this same miracle. The crowd sees a god-king completing his sacred duty. He sees an old man grateful that his legs held out through one more performance. That evening, surrounded by family in private chambers, the old pharaoh allows exhaustion to show. His son sits beside him, holding his hand with gentle strength. "You did well," the son says quietly. "The system is strong. The transition will be smooth. You can rest." "Tell me," the old pharaoh asks, "do you believe in the divine authority, in the cosmic order, in any of it?" The son considers carefully. "I believe that maintaining the system serves important purposes. I believe that people need frameworks for understanding their place in the universe. I believe that accumulated knowledge is sacred and preserving it is divine work. Whether that makes me actually divine in some cosmic sense, I don't know, but I don't think it matters as long as I maintain my act effectively." It's as honest an answer as the old pharaoh could hope for. His children understand both the mechanisms and the meanings, can perform divinity while knowing its performance, can maintain belief in the system's purposes while questioning its theological claims. That's enough. That's all any pharaoh can pass down. Their knowledge to maintain the system, and the wisdom to understand why maintaining it matters. The old pharaoh dies peacefully in his sleep several weeks later. His funeral's grand, befitting someone who ruled for decades and maintained cosmic order through challenging times. The transition to his son is seamless, authority flowing from one generation to the next as smoothly as sunlight flowing through temple corridors. The new pharaoh, the great-grandson of the first pharaoh who perfected the mirror ceremony, inherits a transformed system. Divine kingship is still claimed, but it means something different now. The knowledge infrastructure is vast. The academy is internationally renowned. The astronomical observations span centuries of accumulated data. He performs his first solstice ceremony with confidence born from lifelong preparation. The mirrors work perfectly because the calculations are precise. The crowd erupts because people need to believe in cosmic order maintained by divine authority. The system continues because it serves purposes that transcend individual rulers or particular theological claims. And high above, indifferent to human performance and belief, the sun follows its predicted path, rising exactly when mathematics says it should, setting exactly where geometry requires. The universe continues operating according to laws that humans have slowly decoded through patient observation and careful thought. Maybe that's the only divinity that matters. The universe's consistency, its reliability, its absolute commitment to following patterns that can be understood by anyone dedicated enough to observe carefully and think clearly. The ancient Egyptians discovered this truth and built a civilization around it. They claimed divine authority based on understanding cosmic patterns. They created elaborate performances that made natural phenomena look like divine intervention. They maintained the system for thousands of years, adapting it generation after generation while preserving its essential purposes. The knowledge was real, the understanding was genuine. The divine claims were performance. But the performance based on real knowledge created something that functioned effectively for longer than most civilizations exist at all. That's the real story of how pharaohs commanded the sun, not through impossible divine powers, but through patient observation, mathematical precision, architectural genius, and dedicated performance of a role larger than themselves. They understood how the universe works and used that understanding to create meaning, stability, and civilization. They maintained the performance across generations, each one adapting it slightly while preserving core purposes. They built systems that outlasted individual lives and reputations. The sun rises each morning following patterns ancient astronomers decoded. The temples still stand, aligned to celestial events with precision modern technology struggles to match. The knowledge survives, translated and transmitted and built upon by later civilizations. The gods may have been fictional, but what they represented, human capacity to understand the cosmos through observation and reason, that was always real. The winter solstice comes again, as it always does. The newest pharaoh stands in the temple his ancestors built, arms raised toward a statue that seems to blaze with divine radiance, when it's really just reflecting sunlight bounced between carefully positioned mirrors. The crowd watches in awe. They believe they're witnessing divine intervention. In a way they are, just not the way they think. They're witnessing centuries of accumulated human knowledge, creating an effect that transcends individual understanding. The pharaoh holds his pose, maintaining the performance that maintains belief, that maintains the system, that maintains civilization. It's exhausting and exhilarating and absolutely necessary. The sun rises, because that's what the sun does, but people believe the pharaoh commanded it, and that belief creates loyalty and stability and social cohesion. Both things are true. The sun follows natural laws, the pharaoh commands social forces, neither diminishes the other. That's the secret of divine kingship, passed down across generations, refined and adapted, but never abandoned. You don't need to actually control cosmic forces if you understand them well enough to predict them and perform their demonstration with perfect precision. Knowledge is power, performance is authority. Combined, they create something that looks an awful lot like divinity. And maybe in the end, that's the only divinity humans can achieve, understanding how things work and using that understanding to create meaning and order and civilization that outlasts individual lives. The ancient Egyptians figured this out thousands of years ago. They built monuments that still stand, preserved knowledge that still influences modern science, created a system that maintained stability across centuries. They commanded the sun by understanding it. That's divinity enough. The story doesn't end, of course. It continues as long as Egypt continues, as long as pharaohs perform solstice ceremonies, as long as the knowledge is preserved and passed down and built upon. Generations succeed generations. Some pharaohs are brilliant, others merely competent, a few disastrous, but the system is robust enough to survive individual variations in quality. The knowledge infrastructure, the observational programs, the architectural genius, the astronomical understanding, all of it persists through good rains and bad, through prosperity and crisis, through peace and war. Because that's what systems do when they're built well. They continue, they adapt. They survive challenges that would destroy anything dependent on individual excellence rather than collective knowledge. The Academy, continues producing scholars who understand celestial mechanics and mathematical relationships. The temples continue aligning with solstices and equinoxes and stellar risings. The pharaohs continue performing divine authority based on genuine understanding of cosmic patterns. And eventually, centuries later, when Egyptian civilization declines and foreign powers conquer, and the divine kingship system finally collapses, the knowledge survives. Greek scholars study Egyptian astronomy. Arab mathematicians translate Egyptian texts. European scientists build on foundations laid by patient ancient observers who tracked stars night after night for generations. The divine claims fade. The knowledge persists. The monuments remain as evidence that humans once built civilization on understanding cosmic order. That's the legacy of the pharaohs who commanded the sun. Not divine intervention, but human achievement. Not impossible powers, but accumulated wisdom. Not cosmic authority, but dedicated performance of a role that gave people reasons to believe in order and meaning and progress. They maintained at. Not through literal divine power, but through knowledge and governance and theatrical brilliance and absolute commitment to a performance larger than themselves. That's divinity enough. That's all any human can achieve. That's the real miracle. The sun continues its eternal journey, following patterns ancient astronomers decoded and modern scientists refined. It rises each morning not because anyone commands it, but because the universe operates according to reliable laws. But once, long ago, in temples aligned with perfect precision, pharaohs stood before crowds and raised their arms and let everyone watch while light bounced between mirrors in ways that looked exactly like divine intervention. And the people believed. And the belief created civilization. And the civilization preserved knowledge. And the knowledge eventually transformed into science. All of it starting with someone understanding that you don't need divine power. If you have astronomical precision, an architectural genius, and the confidence to perform miracles you know are really just mathematics made visible. That's how pharaohs commanded the sun. That's how divine kingship worked. That's how knowledge became power, became authority, became civilization. The story continues as long as humans look up at the sky and wonder. As long as someone asks, how does that work? And dedicates themselves to finding answers. As long as accumulated knowledge passes from one generation to the next. The pharaohs began that tradition thousands of years ago. We're still continuing it today, still observing patterns, still making calculations, still building our understanding of how the universe operates. We don't claim divine authority anymore, but we're doing the same essential work, decoding cosmic patterns, using knowledge to create meaning, building systems that outlast individual lives. Maybe that makes us all pharaohs, in a way, all maintaining at cosmic order through dedication to understanding how things actually work. The sun rises tomorrow morning as it always does, following patterns we understand. Not because we command it, but because we understand it. That's divinity enough for any mortal. That's the miracle we can actually perform. That's how we command the sun. Thanks for staying with me through this long journey into ancient Egypt, into the complexity of divine kingship, into the space where knowledge meets performance and creates something that transcends both. If you made it all the way to the end, you're probably asleep by now, which means this worked exactly as intended. Sleep well, knowing that the sun will rise tomorrow exactly when mathematics says it should. No divine intervention necessary, just reliable cosmic patterns that patient ancient observers decoded by watching the sky night after night for generations. And maybe, if you think about it, that's more miraculous than any amount of claimed divine power. The universe operates according to laws we can understand. That's the real magic. Sweet dreams. Thanks for joining me tonight on this journey through ancient Egypt, through the complexity of divine kingship and the intersection of knowledge and belief. If you made it this far, leave a comment about what surprised you most. And sleep well, knowing that the sun will rise tomorrow exactly on schedule, commanded by no one, understood by many, miraculous in its utter reliability.